Call to order the work session of the Maricopa Community College's Governing Board for May 20th of 2019. Thank you all for coming this morning, and a particular thank you to Dr. Barbara Gelman-Danley. We know that there are many demands on your time, so we really appreciate you traveling from Chicago to be with us today.
Thank her for bringing the weather.
Yes. It's always like this in Phoenix in May. This is a very important subject for us today, and there isn't anyone better able to present on the role of governing board members in accreditation and the impact that governing board actions can have on accreditation than the president of the Higher Learning Commission. In a minute, the chancellor will provide a fuller introduction of Dr. Gelman-Danley. But I'd like for the board members to introduce themselves and share how long you have been on the board. I'm Linda Thor, and Barbara and I have known each other for many, many years in a variety of roles that both of us have played. I have been on the board for 20 years, or actually 2.5. It just feels like 20 years. Tom?
I'm Tom Marini. Let's see, I've been on the board since December. Brand new.
Tell me about yourself. I've read online, but what very interesting facts should I know about you?
Oh boy. Let's see. I'm a school counselor, so my commitment to the students, it comes from that. Let's see, I've traveled a bit. I'm from Phoenix, grew up here, but left it for 2 years, and finally came back, and back home.
Good morning. My name is Marie Sullivan, and I was elected to the board in November and began my service in January of this year.
Any interesting fact about yourself or background you want to give?
I have a culinary certificate in strudel making from school in Austria.
Wow. I don't
That
think
is a
anyone's
true
ever
story.
done that.
Yeah, I tell really good not out
All right, we may need them. So
I have served on school board for 8 years previously and was the CEO of a nonprofit for 20 years.
You can introduce yourself.
My name
anyways.
is Leslie Cooper. I'm the general counsel. I have been here just about 2.5 years, and I am planning my next party at Movie house. Tell me how to make strudel.
And so you're not next to
How to make strudel.
I'm Kathleen Moon. I was also elected at the same time as Mr. Mooney, Ms. Sullivan. So we all have interesting facts. I have 7 children, 9 grandchildren. I worked 4 years at the Attorney General's Office as a community outreach director for student population. And I spent 27 years in real estate and banking, so financial statements, commercial banking.
thank you.
We're on board quite a bit. Down to 16 months to go.
There's an app for that. I know.
I'm also a student with the company, with Mason.
Good morning, Barbara Marie, Chancellor. Would you like for people around the room to
Sure,
shortly introduce
absolutely.
themselves so that you know who's here? Dr. Gonzalez.
Good morning, I'm Stephen Gonzalez, President of Gateway Community College.
I know you moved your mics in case you want to.
Are those mics on?
They are, yeah.
Good morning, Artie Lar, President from Estella Mountain for, I think I have 1 month and 9 days. I do have the app for that.
Good morning, Paul Dale, President out of Paradise Valley Community College.
Good morning, Terry Levaris, President at Glendale Community College. I've been in the district for over 20 years, serving as faculty in various roles to the role of presidency.
Good morning, Sherry Olson, president at South Mountain Community College.
Good morning, Larry Johnson, president of Phoenix College, almost 1 year in June.
All right, someone soon, and then you'll be sophomore. Next person. All right,
Carl Fisher, I'm the district provost. We met before.
yes.
I'm Darcy Renfro, I'm the chancellor's chief of staff.
Matt Hassel, communication director for the district.
Elliot Hibbs, chief operating officer.
Good morning again, Chris Haynes, Scottsdale Community College.
Rich Haney, president, Mason Community College.
Good morning, Sherry Andres, a former Maricopa employee and currently a higher ed consultant.
Do we, yes, go ahead, folks back here.
Hi, Dr. John Storsley, Paradise Valley, faculty CIS.
Keith Effner, hi, welcome. I am the current Faculty Association president.
Tell me what you all teach.
I'm in music department at Mason Community College. I teach audio production technology.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm John Champel. I'm the past president of the Faculty Association, and I teach biology at Phoenix College.
Good morning, I'm Dawn Browse, and I teach dental hygiene at Red Mountain campus.
Liz Jakar, life science assistant chair at Red Mountain Community College.
Eddie Jenna, philosophy, Phoenix College.
Jim Simpson, accounting and computer information systems at Scottsdale Community College.
Teresa Tony, director for the Office of Public Stewardship.
How many of you have ever attended a HLC meeting? And how many of you have served as a peer reviewer? Institutional Actions Council. Keep that hand up, because I know with you. All right, great.
We have a few more people.
I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Janelle Elias, I'm the district director of enterprise performance.
Good morning, Matt Ashcraft. I serve as Associate Vice Chancellor for Strategy and Effectiveness.
Great.
Donna?
Donna.
Donna Beamer, assistant to the board.
Thank you all. Did we miss anyone?
The gentleman in
The gentleman who
That's our
wants
check guy, ain't doing good.
Jordan Woodruff, audio video coordinator. I'm here to make sure everything works, and I will be on call.
All right, don't leave then, because I thought I was pressing forward with this top button, and I hear a lovely sound, so show me what I'm doing. Which one do I press?
And Barbara, before you begin, I believe that the Chancellor would like to introduce you.
Thank you, Dr. Thorpe. For the record, Barbara Goldman Downey assumed the presidency of the Higher Learning Commission in July 2014. Prior to joining the commission, Dr. Goldman Downey was president of University of Rio Grande Community College in Ohio. Previously served as vice chancellor for the Ohio Board of Regents, president of Antioch University McGregor, vice president of Monroe Community College in New York, vice chancellor of the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education, and faculty member and distance learning coordinator at Oklahoma City Community College. She has served on several boards and commissions during her career, including the Association of Governing Boards, AGB, Council of Presidents, the American Council on Education Commission on Education and Attainment, the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning Board, and the ETS National Community College Council. She has consulted with over 30 institutions on strategic planning, the role of technology in higher education, distance learning, and related topics. She is also certified as a coach and has the following certifications: certified professional coach, associate certified coach, certification as a social and emotional intelligence coach, and Happiness Studies Academy. We're honored to have you today.
Thank you. All set?
We are.
All right. I'm not going to stand up a lot, but I'm going to stand up a little bit. Let me just, well, can you hear me all right? All right. Want to make sure that I get an opportunity to explain why I'm here and why I'm happy to be here. First of all, I want to go back to the 90s when I served for almost 9 years at Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York, which is and still remains a League for Innovation in the Community College member. And I was a league rep with Mary Kay Kickles, who some of you remember, and other individuals that were quite interesting. I know Rufus through the Higher Learning Commission and other avenues in our career. I knew Paul Elsner. I had broken my ankle and Paul wanted to explain something philosophically, and after standing on crutches for 20 minutes, Mary Kay said, maybe she'd like to sit. And it's been, I've always had a great deal of respect for Maricopa Community Colleges. Part of what I did when I was at, we can pronounce it Rio, like Ohio, and there's a longer story behind that, but one of your former presidents sat with me on a board and we would make sure our distinction was Rio and Rio. When I was, prior to coming there, I was asked to come in and work with the institution. They have a private university, it's the only one in the country like this, that runs a public community college through an agreement, and they have 2 boards. They were having a little difficulty getting along. And I came in, and at that point I fell in love with governance, the challenges of governance, the paradox of being an elected trustee, when you are representing constituents, but you need to make sure you also first represent the district as a whole. I'm not here to lecture you, I'm here to help. And I'm here to give you some insights and some observations. Only toward the end am I going to mention anything about HLC. So this is not a threat or anything like that. I realize that I carry that title, but I'm here as a governance person who loves community colleges, all right? The first thing I want us to spend some time on is important, and I don't know if you've had any time to think about this, but I really would like to start with a couple of things. First of all, we're going to talk about the legacy, and then we might, depending on time, move into trends in higher education. A few of you mentioned students as part of your professional life or while you're here. I'm going to make an important assumption that you're all here for the sake of the students. And I remember one time when I was consulting for Rio that there was some fussiness going on, and basically there was a glass window, and we had 3 representatives of the board of the university and 3 of the community college, and I said, well, let's just all pause for a moment and imagine that it was a private university, so it was smaller, 2,400 students, noses are pressed up against that glass window. And is every decision and everything we're doing on behalf of the students? And if you keep that in mind, which I'm going to make the assumption that is very important to you, or you wouldn't be here, then we can sometimes move past certain disagreements. So let's talk for a few minutes about your legacy. I want to start with your individual legacy at Maricopa. So it's kind of like the magazine approach when you're doing strategic planning. If there were X amount of years from now, what would you want the article to say about Dr. Narini, for example? If they were writing an article and said, you served on this board for X amount of years, or feels like 20 years, the way you put it, what would you want that legacy to be? Have any of you had a chance to think this through a little bit? So let's start with, it's 5 years from now. So it's 2024. And we're going to have a nice big article, front page of the Chronicle for Higher Ed, which means you're going to be posing like that because they always like those kind of pictures. And you're going to be mentioning what you individually believe and actually have some evidence that you've contributed to the Maricopa Community Colleges. What might that be?
CTE.
Pardon me?
CTE.
CTE. So, all right, career technology education and the importance, and tell me why. How is that important to you?
Well, I've always been involved in it. I taught at EVIT, which is one of our joint technical schools, and my master's is in CTE. And my mom was a home ec teacher, so I go back a long way with it. It's just been very important to me to make sure that students have the ability to get skills as well as knowledge.
All right, so that's the legacy piece. That last sentence you said that students can have the knowledge, but it's very important that they also have the skills. So they can apply it, they can get jobs, they can use it, okay? What else? Yes?
Workforce.
Is someone keeping a list of this, by the way? Does anybody ever do that? Thanks. I'm sorry to ask you to do that, but if I'm going to stand, I can't. Go ahead.
Don't come back 5 years from now, hope.
I hope I won't come back.
Workforce development technology training, so that we're providing the workforce for the future, so that we're the example of how you do that in the community. And I will be part of that.
And how will you be part of that? How will your individual
By-
legacy help with that?
By connecting organizational leadership, people that I know personally with the colleges and the college presidents for developing those kinds of courses and for identifying jobs that we have in our community and matching them to our students that are coming through us.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to go next?
It's really important to me that we have voice and representation for all of our constituents, including our students.
Got it.
I'd like to, at Legacy, say something about making community college a primary destination for students by developing high-quality programs for students so that it becomes their first choice and not a backup. I also want to be known to provide a pathway for DACA and undocumented students getting an education and providing just strong programs that help increase enrollment, persistence, and graduation for students.
Okay.
Tough question. I would want my individual legacy to be that I, through decision-making and work, invested or saw that the district would invest in improving the quality of life for anyone who chose to come through this system, and so that they can see their path forward to make a contribution to their own life and the life of their community. And how would I do that? By being fiscally responsible, thinking and working collaboratively with stakeholders to ensure that we're making the best decisions possible at some risk and stability.
Great. Trustees, any other legacy comments you want to make about your individual legacy? Okay, let's move on to the legacy of the board, which you may have somewhat answered in your individual legacy, but now you've got to think of all of you. So I'm going to ask each of you to say something about what you want the legacy of the board to be. Okay? Yes?
I'll start, that we are taking risks to improve our ability to move the district forward in ways, innovative and collaborative ways with our community.
That a board, whichever board has been over the last 23 years, leaves the district and its board in better shape than they came in with.
Hold on to that one. Okay? All of them, but that's, I'm glad you said that. Who else?
Well, I was gonna say something quite similar, that we did more good than harm.
Yeah.
I would just say to define success and to provide a positive vision to move forward by advocating and supporting ways to find the necessary resources to move forward.
Okay. This board is defined as a time of collaboration and working in conjunction with the colleges for the greatest good, for getting successes, that whatever the presidents or the vision of the chancellor and the board together, that there is a common goal, that we achieve that goal, and that there's peace, and everyone's working towards those common goals.
So, does everyone have something you could take notes on? This is for you. Take a minute and write down in 2 columns. Take a few minutes. What have you done so far to contribute to what you've mentioned? And what have you done that might have gotten in the way of either yours or other people's agendas? What have you done to contribute toward it? Is there anything you've done that might have gotten in the way of yours or anybody else's legacy that they're discussing?
Talking about our individual?
You as individuals, so when you, I don't want to be disrespectful, is it all right if I call you Marie?
You may.
Okay,
Please.
so Marie is going to say, all right, this is what I have done to actually contribute to that, And then true confessions, if it's possible, if you have issues that you say, maybe if I had done this a little differently, I wouldn't have gotten in the way of my or somebody else's agenda. Because we all can do things a little differently, so it's not assuming anything. So let's take a few minutes and do that. And by the way, presidents, feel free to think the same thing, what you want your legacy to be, and what you want your institution's legacy to be, and then the full district. I know it's quiet on the video out there, but we're working here. Had this same discussion with different chancellors and different trustees in the history of Maricopa. I think we all know that. Just put that out on the table. I've known several of your chancellors, I've known several of your presidents and trustees, and what you are struggling with is not unique. When, as the president of the largest regional accreditor in the country, the number one issue that comes up is assessment. And then there are other issues that come up largely, and governance is one of them. And you may find it not surprising, they come up a little bit more when it's an elected board. So it's very common. No. No,
I was hoping.
I want your legacy to be something that you're not remembered for what becomes public persona of the board. It's just not what you want to be remembered for. You're too good for that. You have, after, what is it, after the LA district, or how, are you second largest? Is it after LA?
Yes.
So what you want to be remembered for is what I remember Maricopa for, putting any governance things in the parking lot, or any president issues or chancellor issues. What I remember Maricopa for is, of all the 30 institutions that I did not consult at, I would love to have consulted at Maricopa. You were always ahead of the times, very community oriented, obviously very into social justice and serving a variety of audiences. I remember, and I don't know if it's the same now, so I'm going to go back to when Gateway had all these computers, and everybody, and it was a computer pit. When Linda and I first met each other, it was like, that was like the coolest thing in the country, and everybody wanted to come see that. So changing the conversation, new and different. Certainly Rio Salado under Linda and subsequent leadership, amazing things took place. It happens everywhere, that there are some issues that we can make better. When I was consulting at Foothill De Anza, they had just been named the best community college in the country for being a wired campus. And when I was there, I found out everything that wasn't perfect about their wired campus. And I don't have to tell you that the presidents didn't always agree with the chancellor, and the decision to bring on a certain vendor wasn't always agreed upon, and all those kinds of things. So what I want you to be remembered for, the legacies that you all talked about. Is there anything, and you're not obligated at all, you would like to share from what you wrote down in either column?
I'll share. First of all, you're alluding to scenarios that I don't know what elephant in the room you're really addressing. There probably are several, and so I'm hearing from you different comments, but I'm not clear from you what your perspective is, why you're here, number one. And so that leads me to what I see as one of my challenges, and that is I need to do a better job of listening. And sometimes I'm too trusting, and so what I do here, I take at face value, and then find a little bit further down the road that the information's being misconstrued or misinterpreted, and I hear it through rumor, not directly. So if I'm contributing to that, that would be certainly something getting in the way. The other is, I think I've been holding back sometimes in my ability to interrupt what I see as dysfunction. And because again, that requires risk. And it doesn't seem that this is a safe place for risk. And the other one, to which I owe many apologies, is I have not done enough to visit all the campuses, listen to all the leaders, and explore their needs and issues. Some of it based on time, and other of it just because it never made my calendar. So those are what my challenges are that I believe.
That's a very gracious sharing, and I appreciate that. When I said what I want you to be remembered for, what I didn't say was I don't want you to be remembered for the fact that a lot of people in the country recognize that there's a DNA pattern across decades of a fussiness within the Maricopa board that makes it hard for chancellors, presidents, and ultimately students. Because if you have a sense that, if you have a confusion over governance versus operations, if you get excited and you want to go to a campus and it's not coordinated appropriately, and we'll talk about that, then that clash becomes well-known. And not well-known because your chancellors are talking about it, but well-known because there's so many people in higher ed that know and respect Maricopa. And it's an opportunity cost. When those tensions are going on, or frankly, the faculty do what they did recently, that takes everything away from focusing on the students. It becomes a personal battle, or it becomes a group battle. And I'm speaking to very intelligent people who've been very successful in business and counseling, the most important group of people we have, K through 12, as they're coming through. And it's almost like, what would you say to them if they grew up and to be a Maricopa Chancellor board member, when you get them at those very important years? And I'm not saying that to offend you, it's a fact. At HLC, when I got there are things throughout your whole history that are written about fussiness with the board. And what I don't want is when you have your next visit at your next college that's going to be visited, you are their board too, that becomes an issue. But I'm not here to talk about how to have a perfect accreditation visit. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. I'm here to point out to you what somebody has to be brave enough to say, knowing that you're good people with good intent, and is there a way to help you understand some of the very amazingly wonderful things you're doing, and also what might be getting in the way. So that's the reason I'm here. Does that clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. Anybody else want to share?
My longtime challenge is I was never given a lot of patience.
I could match you in that. I say in the dictionary, patient, not Barbara Gelman-Down. But it takes a lot of self, I guess it's control too, but, or mind over matter, but I feel your pain on that one.
So do most other people.
So what I'm hearing so far, one sec, is that I want to make sure I don't get in the way of, you know, is there something I could do a little differently and listen and not miss certain things, and also, you know more about what's going on the campuses, but also I hear sometimes I want to move forward and I've got to be patient, okay? By the way, we're all human, so these are all very natural kinds of things.
I think it's a matter for, you know, we're all new, we haven't worked together as a body, we're getting to know each other, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there were things that preceded us coming onto the board that were happening last year that were very public, and so you have to build trust, and it's hard to build trust when there's so much media or outside attention to what it is that we're doing. And so it makes it, it's not that I didn't expect it to be done in behind closed doors, but at the same time, you want to treat people with respect. At least I do, and I think we may not agree or we may not come from the same political point of view, but I always think that the problem is the biggest thing, and for us, the problem here is educating our students. And we may have different ways that we want to achieve that, but how we determine the best path forward for that without dissolving into the personalities or the paths that we've come to get here, I think that the problem, the issue, should be the priority. And then it's not about us, and it shouldn't be about us. But then it's about how do we solve that, and then everyone can put their ideas in. You may not get your idea accepted. Yeah, what you have to offer may not be the best thing, but at least then everyone could be heard, and everyone could have input. And I think that that's something that I'm trying to figure out, how do we achieve that?
Great, thank you. Others?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that on the column that I haven't been doing very well is I haven't done enough to understand the personalities, goals, and priorities of the other members. And I think one of the things we can move forward with is try to define what is students' success, and how do we get there. I think that's part of what's missing. Is I think we all have different definitions, and we're operating on different definitions of what student success is. And you know, the whole fiduciary responsibility that we have.
Those are actually exciting conversations. And Maria, if you'll remind me after, I'll send you the link. You have to dig a little bit on our website. We had we have a strong strategic plan, and we had backing from the Lumina Foundation for a couple parts of innovation and student success. And those of you who've heard me talk or been peer reviewers know this. And there were 4 student success papers. Changing the conversation, the importance of disaggregation, like what is a student's intent, you know, progress toward what. It's amazing about how you learn about other people, the things you're saying, get to know their personalities by having those kind of discussions, because then it's not personal, it's not about any particular agenda or anything that you may have that you want to accomplish. You can fold your agendas into that. So I'm very glad you brought up student success. If there could be some kind of visual 3D, I just got a new car and I can't park to save my life, and it has this perfect thing in front of me that's got all these beeps and shows me everything. And if it just said student success in front of everything that you're doing, and also I might add to the faculty the decisions that you make and what you do in your classrooms, of course, and the presidents, that's what matters. Unfortunately, politics and media, one of the great advantages of an open meeting is it's an open meeting. One of the great disadvantages of sunset laws and open meetings is you don't get a chance to socialize and get to know each other in a way that allows for that trust and knowledge to be built. On the trust issue, part of my social emotional intelligence training on this, but on the trust issue, think about somebody that really matters to you and how you built the trust. Did you start with, I'm going to trust you until you show me I can, or if you're like from New York, the opposite. So it's a matter of that kind of thing. And also, I find the hall breaks, if you use the hall breaks or to say, you know, I heard what you said, I want to understand that better, that kind of perception checking can really make a difference in relationships. Linda, I think we haven't heard from you on this one.
I would say that we don't take seriously enough that we are by law a nonpartisan board. And the political biases of board members too often are coming into play in the decisions that we're making, as well as how we feel about each other. So I do think we need to constantly remind ourselves that we have an obligation to be nonpartisan.
Well, look at Congress, and those of you who've been to my conferences know I get in trouble all the time for being obvious about my politics, but if you look at Congress now, do you feel that they're nonpartisan? The chance of the Higher Ed Act passing while Senator Alexander's there, which he wants to happen, may be difficult if the parties can't come together, because we have one party in minority and majority in one part of Congress and it flips in the others. And so the good work that they want to do is tied to their official politicians. And they have that challenge. But in your case, I know you get elected, and I've always said, so this isn't about you, if you listen to trustees' meetings of elected trustees, in some cases, it sounds like people are running for office. And I say that, I have a couple presidents or coaching clients, the same situation, it's not uncommon. If you lead with the heart, that's okay, then it just passes that. And I know you really care about the students. So then we talked about a little bit about where did these two answers converge and diverge. And not like this is an AA meeting, but if there's any time you feel that you might have not listened to someone, I'm just gonna tell you, and this is from my doctorates in communication, all that, say privately to that person, I'm not sure I heard you, I'm not sure I understood. I thought it was great that you said, why are you here? You know exactly, help me understand what you're trying to achieve. Isn't it better than sitting there saying, oh, I think this is what she's gonna do, and then if you do that, that's called meta-communication, and then you can't really hear what's being said. So I think this is a real opportunity, and I'm disappointed, and I'm sorry that a couple trustees are not here, and if you could make them watch this at least, they can't participate the same way, it would be great, because I think it could be helpful. Now, so I want to do something that allows you to practice what you were talking about. The trends in higher education, why don't you pull them out? Now, take a look for a minute at these trends. And I don't know that our audience has copies of these.
We do not.
Some people do. It's on our website for those of you who are working with laptops.
Yes, they were outside the table.
They're on the table.
Yeah. Outside table.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk you through these trends because I put them together. Now, we have a, we do a survey at the Higher Learning Commission that I ask for a lot of qualitative, not just quantitative, and therefore I feel obligated to read those, every page. So what's in here is what I put in initially on my own, and then the input from 400 pages of responses from our colleges. And some of you in here probably filled that survey out, which is what are the trends that impact higher education? And then we were very deductive. You want to think about, obviously, in your case, and what does that mean for Maricopa? So I'm just going to walk through them quickly. Overall in finance, we're losing a lot of international students. I don't know if that impacts you at all. I could imagine it could. There's so, but for the international students that are coming, it's a stress to somehow absorb those international students within your current budgets. Enrollment declines across the country. I'm quite certain your chancellor, president, staff, board chair kept you current about this. If there were a recession, your enrollment goes up at community colleges. If things are fine, it goes down. But it's not just that. There are a lot of new players coming in. And when you mention CTE, if you look at the credential isn't just a degree, okay? And so you have the associate's degree applied or in arts, but the idea is that there are people out there who will encourage your students to enroll in an academy where they can take 8 months of something and get a job. And you almost can't blame them for that, and sometimes they're stackable that could go toward a degree, and sometimes they're not. So there are a lot of really good and a lot of really, I'll use an academic term, schlocky, organizations going out there. For those of you who don't speak Yiddish, that means not good. The idea is that these third-party providers are also impacting your enrollment, and especially at community colleges, because they have that opportunity to say, now the irony is welding is often used as an example, but you need a degree to do welding. So I find that's what they say in Congress. Well, you can get a welding degree and pay a lot less. And I said, well, no, you can't, or a certificate. You've got to get a degree in that profession. But there are so many times that you could just get a piece of something. So think of all your degrees or work that you did. Real estate, I'm sure there's continuing professional ed that you have to do, so you gather another piece and you're okay for commercial, residential, all that kind of stuff. Those things have been available for a long time, but now it's becoming an entire industry. So the competition's there. There is a big concern about financial literacy. I'm just gonna pick a few of students. That they come in, they get all this debt. I guess a graduation speaker at Morehouse College decided to wipe out the debt of all the people in the audience, and they could not do that at yours to many students, but I mean, the idea is it was a wonderful idea, and we're all concerned about student debt. Mergers and acquisitions may not be something that impacts you, but if you look at the private schools around you that are really suffering, or the rural colleges, looking how they work together, or that may be the case. A lot of litigation, and that is distracting and costly. Lawyers, what can I tell you? There's just today in the Chronicle, additional potential cuts to Pell Grants, all those kinds of things going on. Schools closing. Now, if in the case of those schools that close, that you could offer something to their students, I believe the community colleges have done a good job. So when the ITT and the Corinthian colleges and all those kinds of things, we did have a lot of community colleges across the country jump in and say, I'll take them. But you don't have to, it's your choice. So if you don't feel it's college level, or if you're concerned about the translation, it's your choice who you take. But if you keep the student in mind, you think, well, what can we do to help these poor students that may have been misled and are now out on the streets? Performance-based funding, I don't think you have that in Arizona. You don't have funding in Arizona, so you why would you have performance-based funding? Right. We had an opportunity to have, Walter Bumpus was going to speak to our strategic planning retreat, which had all our staff and some trustees a few years ago. And he's from AACC, and he hurt his knee. So Rufus was on the board, and we asked him to speak, and it was a cathartic moment. All he talked about was Arizona and the money coming out of the budget and the legislation where the names come out. I just want to tell you that government relations has to be handled in a central way. I don't know who, if any, but it's very important that government relations not be done in a scattered way by either staff or trustees. It has to be coordinated. I know in my office that I just finished a joyous 4 months of negotiated rulemaking opportunities, and I was very clear to my staff that you can't be the voice to legislators and senators. I have to do that. Now, by the way, you can make me sound really good. You can give me all the background, you can help me, or you can go with me. But we don't want to confuse the legislators, and I know there's been a little bit of that here and there. So the pipeline, the competition, the free college, you are a big feeder to Arizona State. And yet Arizona State's trying all new kinds of things all the time that could draw your students away, okay? So it's, the personnel, I will tell you, and one thing I just need to be direct, all the public buzz that detracts from talking about these important issues will not make it attractive for someone to come and apply here as an employee. So I say that to the board, the presidents, the staff, and the faculty, that you need to think about certain things that somebody, if they had a, I want to apply to this and I want to apply to that, but here's a pattern or a history, they're gonna say, I'm uncomfortable with that, especially the people at the top, so just keep that in mind. So with the new business models, the financial challenges, et cetera, let's move into a couple other areas. And student services, it's very important that student services be, very current. There are a lot of challenges with the credit hour. How do you define the credit hour? The most recent negotiations did not get rid of the credit hour. They just couldn't figure out a way because it ties to federal financial aid. There's a lot of interest in global citizenship, and I know that you guys are very good at that. There are beliefs that accreditation stifles innovation, so the good creative schools figure out how to be innovative and work with the accreditors to make it happen. I don't think we stifle innovation, but I'm glad to look at that if you feel we do. It's very important to keep your faculty informed. Your faculty are the core, the heart of the organization. They are on the front lines. They are taking their expertise in dealing with the student. And despite all the wonderful supports you have, and you do have a lot of terrific student support services, the person they identify with primarily is the faculty member. So just take good care of your faculty and listen to your faculty and make sure they also listen to you. It's two-way. There's unfortunately a declining support for developmental education that may not impact you, but in states where there's performance-based funding, there's a fear that if we bring in students who need this, then they don't succeed, then we don't get the grades that we want and the money coming to the institution. So this is very true in K through 12 with all the national testing, that do you lower the bar in the classroom so students do better if it's tied to funding, but it doesn't work that way here, so you're good. The biggest concern about higher ed in general is there's a lot of graduates in debt and a lot of jobs out here, and they're not necessarily matching, and that's important. Let's go on to issues related to governance. On page, I didn't number the pages, that's interesting, because it's from the web. All right, so the 1, 2, 3 pages in, leadership and governance. There's a national debate on shared governance. I'm going to talk about this at the end. One thing I would like to say, and I hope the trustees who are not here hear this as well, shared governance is at the heart of the academic environment. When I was on the negotiated rulemaking, there were things put in there that the federal government wanted to have alternate ways of governance, and that did pass, and that's okay, because alternate ways of accreditors viewing institutions. But I made a comment that's on the record then, that's up to the academy, and it's not up to the Department of Ed saying that. I will tell you as a president, and I never thought I'd be sitting there defending shared governance, because we'd all like to be dictators. It would be a whole lot easier, we would get things done. But I was offended that shared governance was even mentioned at the negotiated rulemakings, because that is up to us in higher education. I understand that people who come from business think we've kind of lost our minds. What is getting a voice from everybody? What is tenure? All those are very important things to handle with appropriate respect, and if change is needed, to do it collaboratively. I think I've said enough on that. The leadership pipeline for presidencies, I ran into someone who was at the latest ELI, Executive Leadership Institute of the League. When I spoke there, we all know that the pipeline to the presidency is not good. In other words, it takes a great deal to be a president, and it's much harder now than it was when we started, and and will continue to be harder. I think it would be great if you had a whole session on what are the pressures on the chancellor and the president. If you had a work session where you just talked about that, because honestly, you don't know until you're in that seat. And by the way, staff and faculty don't know either until you're in that seat, and I'm not hesitant to say that. When I left the university, Rio Grande / Rio Grande Community College, I know that pronunciation sounds so funny to you guys, but the person who'd been my COO, who'd been arm in arm with me, who'd been at the college a lot longer than I had in the university, stepped in, called me the first time, and says, "Oh my God, I see why you worked every night till midnight. I didn't realize these kinds of things." I mean, everything can become a production, and every legal challenge can become a huge issue that detracts from the president's, every lawsuit, every student, God forbid, suicide or issues like that. It's very difficult. They happened when I went to college, but the presidents weren't as involved. And a lot of the stress issues, which came out in another survey I'll mention, student stress and work-life balance, is increasing to the point of our students need a whole lot of support. So this is, honestly, walk a day in the shoes of these college presidents and a chancellor, and it is a difficult job. And the pipeline is getting smaller. I mean, even if you just take demographics, the fact that the 18 to 22-year-old people are not having 7 kids, you know, it's getting to be less children. And you've contributed to the society, and everybody else is just deciding to have less kids. And so as a result, you don't have the pipeline. So under those circumstances, it's a big challenge. And then there's a lot of system leadership issues across the country with governance, many schools. And the importance of mission-driven decision-making falls under governance. What is the mission of the Maricopa Community Colleges? Does the decision you're about to make support that mission or you know, in a conflict with us? And so what I wrote about governance, and this is me, governance problems create a huge productivity gap for administrators due to the huge opportunity cost of attending to split boards, disagreements with the CEO, or the propagation of individual agendas. I am not pointing to you alone. This is a national issue, and I'm not saying it's always the case with you by any means. I would say this to any board, even if they weren't perfect harmony. So I do not mean to offend. Leadership changes at the institution too often cause a challenge of flux. When I was at one institution, we had 7 locations, and one of them turned their president over, or 7 colleges within a university, turned that, we'd sit in meetings like you guys are in the back, and we said, let's figure out how many people left that college, or how many chancellors and presidents I've had since I've been here. And it would be, that place was enormous, it was way too much. And that just causes a challenge. You have 2 or 3 primary roles: hire the CEO or not, strategic planning, mission, and those are your key things. You know, that as far as anybody else hired, it's respectful and appropriate to bring it to you, but that's how it goes. That's your job, and it's important. And I think we're all facing, unfortunately, the public perceptions of higher education, the challenges with that. There are full groups that are working on trying to fix the image of higher education, but I think it helps us look at ourselves. So there's other issues, and certainly access, and I was delighted to hear a lot of you mention the importance of access and the dreamers and all of that. So let me ask, in looking at this list, are there any issues that you say, wow, that really fits Maricopa?
I think looking at trends, what is missing here that I've been, and it's because I'm 70, I'm sitting in a classroom with 22-year-olds. That's a different
the adult
mindset
yeah.
in our Gen Z and millennials than when I grew up. And I think we tend to teach the way we've always taught, and this new group is simply not into that. Technology has played a big factor in that, obviously, but so has the parenting and other issues that are non-academic related, but have that effect in the classroom and online and everything else. That things we try to do the same way we've always done them, they don't work with this group anymore.
Right.
And the trend is slow in moving. I'm not a patient person here, of course, but I think that's a trend that we really have to be aware of and constantly looking at ways to meet the educational delivery needs of our students today.
So no knowing your students and the fact that student success will be different based on those type of students goes right along with the papers that were written for HLC, if you ever get a chance to look at those. But it's also, the flip of that is dealing with adult learners, which community colleges have more experience, which is andragogy, not pedagogy. It's two very different things. And I think Rio Salato could speak to that extensively with the online learning that happened so many years ago, et cetera. Excellent point. What else?
Barbara, can I say, just, this is not a plug, but this is true. I talked to a lot of board members from the country who attend their accrediting agencies' annual meetings. We've never done that. In my 9 years, no one has ever gone from the board to an HLC meeting. Of course, different than Pima, because they had a unique situation. But when they came back, they said that that was the best conference they went to, and they've gone to that now as, in some cases, in opposition to ACCT, because they felt. So I'm just wondering,
well, let me
what
tell
do we
you,
get from that we're not getting from ACCT?
we actually, well, ACT focuses on governance, and when it focuses on a lot of the issues, it's about governance for student success. That's their whole thing, is governance. We talk about national trends in higher education, strategic planning. It's very helpful to learn the criteria, not that you ever have to be the one responsible for it, but knowing what is assessment, what is student learning, how do you know a student has learned, how is the needle moved. We had a national speaker, several really good national speakers. ACCT has about 1,200, we have 4,500. And so it starts, there's peer review sessions, you hear from other schools, but it's all about higher education. And of course, while it's the impact on accreditation, it's everybody says, fabulous conference. And so I'm not plugging, I read the reviews. So we had an issue this year where some of the faith-based institutions thought that maybe we weren't respecting their mission. I held a session right on that. We have governance sessions. I did a whole one on strategic planning, and I thought everyone's gonna fall asleep. It's the last day of, when you leave at noon the next day, and it was standing room only. And this wasn't about, if you do this, you'll get accreditation. It was just, let me do a brain dump. But the schools, and you've had a lot of people, how many of you have ever presented at our annual conference? And I had Marie on a panel a couple of years ago, and I had her there because we had all white males from universities, and I thought, let's just bring Marie in. She's gonna definitely she's gonna make it a little more interesting. And not because of the gender, but because of personality. And we talked about what student success. And you have a situation where you have a private university president from Northwestern who has such selective admission that of course his student success rates are very high. And for what they're paying, it should be. It's a very good institution. It's a terrific institution. And then you have open access institution. And I once had Michael Crow there. I don't think I had him the same year of Ford and Gee, was at Ohio State at West Virginia, but Michael Crow talked about his heart is in open access, bringing people in, but it doesn't mean it's not a strong research institution. So, very rich, and you can look at the agenda. If you come as trustees, I think that's really important. There's a President's Day that trustees are allowed to attend with their presidents. None of the presidents want their trustees to go to President's Day without them. Because the idea of it is you're building a relationship at that time as well. And then your chancellor or presidents can tell you, here's what really happens based on what we've heard. So what else? What other issues resonate on the trend?
I think one of the things for me is student services and student affairs. We need to elevate that. Not to say the faculty does a wonderful job, but when we lose, this is coming from 20 years as a student affairs person and as a counselor, we lose students not because of faculty, but because of the enrollment process, the financial aid, all the things that happen along the way. But yet, too often student services are like, oh, just the student services, they'll deal with it. And it's not. We need to elevate them, we need to listen to them more and hear what's going on and hear some of the concerns, whether it's the IT. Just last week, I was helping a student register for a class, and we couldn't find a class. We couldn't navigate the system, and until we call the IT. But we need to listen to the student services, the student affairs, because those are the areas where we're losing students, not from the faculty, not from the classrooms. It's student services, and I don't think their voice is being heard enough.
And if you ask them the same question that I suggest you would be, think about with the presidents and chancellor, what keeps you up at night? Conversation with some of the student affairs professionals, what keeps you up at night? I know that those are the people who hear the fear. Your financial aid office is so important, it's so intimidating. I have a doctorate in all kinds of degrees, and I could not fill out a FAFSA form probably, especially when I was young. If I was fortunate, I didn't have to. My parents saved for me very generously. But the point is, then when I went on to grad school and I was on my own, I was like, what is this? You know, I don't want a loan. I just want to know, how can I work? What do I need to do? It's very complex. And Senator Alexander wants a one-page FAFSA. I mean, good luck with that. But the fact is, it's very complex. And then they are bringing their mental stress issues to the institution. You may be doing all of what I'm about to say, but I did visit Arizona State, and I think they call them student success coaches. And their investment in data-driven decisions, they know when these students take a break to go to the restroom. They know when to do intervention strategies. They have all these things, there's graphics everywhere, and they can say, this is where we need to intervene and contact a student. That takes a lot more pushing out than when some of us went to college. We were on our own, but it's important. So that's an excellent point.
I think there's a trend right now, and you addressed it with how kids are learning. So with disengaged youth, and we call them opportunity youth, and also we have a very large foster care population in this county. And they get to 18 and then they are out of the system. So how do we, I don't know if the community college can solve that, but I think we could be a part of working with those young people. We have 75,000 in Maricopa County kids, 15 to 24 that are not in high school, not in college, not working.
That's an opportunity. I think that is a good way of framing it. Long time ago, Seattle Community College District, are they still league members? Seattle? They had a program for the homeless. They would talk about like the homeless group under a bridge and how they would go to them and how they would help them and try to get them into college. I know you're doing a lot of that, but the issue is there's always more to be done.
Well, our state isn't doing enough, other than through the Opportunity Youth Grant, so that's.
Your state's been a disappointment, and I feel your pain. Because I know some of the funding's come back and all of that, but not to understand the value of higher education. You will never have enough money here. Any opportunity for state dollars, keep in mind, you will never have enough money here to do everything you want. But redirecting your resources and assuring that you're maximizing what you can afford. But the insult of saying to to some of the universities and to you and Pima, we're not gonna give you any money. Now, I just want you to feel the pain of Illinois. They said they were, and for 2 years they did not, and they never made them whole, and there was no cash flow. So at least you knew you were in trouble starting the year. In Illinois, it's Illinois politics. That's all I have to say.
Yes.
It was unfortunate. Any other observations about trends?
I appreciate the micro thinker, and I tend to be more the well, maybe that's unfair, but, so I appreciate those comments, and I tend to go a different level, not good or bad, just different thinker. You mentioned strategic planning as one of our roles, and I'm looking at the trends, and there's a lot of relationship to that. And I go back then to the importance of mission-driven decision-making under leadership and governance. I noticed none of these comments really bring out the context of strategic planning. Is there another place where we may be talking about that this morning?
We can certainly find a way to do that. These trends, the way we do our strategic planning, and MBA would tell you the same thing. I'll give you a quick rundown. You do start with what are the external trends. So this feeds into a strategic plan.
Right.
And then you do your current state, what are the internal trends. I believe it's critically important to do a level that isn't done, and that is, so what? What are the implications, okay? So for anyone who has a doctorate, there's always someone on the dissertation committee that's, you know, you go, you're all proud, you come in, right? You talk about all the things you've done, and someone says, so what? What does that mean for the discipline? Damn, I knew someone was gonna ask that. But in strategic planning, we tend to jump right to, okay, we got these trends, external, now here's what we should do. And I think it's important to pause, and these would be great discussions on campus, if you, I'm sure you do a lot of this, and with your board to say, all right, we've heard this work that's gone into the planning, so what? What does it mean for us? And then you move to recommendations. And then the other thing is, I always say, tie it to budget. I'm not unique with that, but actually put in staffing. Do you have the right people on the bus? Do you have them in the right seats on the bus to realize flipping all these to positives?
To that point then, now, I didn't really see the phrasing strategic planning in any of the documents I read. Would you put that under the leadership governance piece, tied to the importance of mission?
Mission.
For the
It would be
board
with
as
mission.
well?
Yeah, it's
Thank
with mission, and I will tell you that in our criteria, if you go on our website and look up criteria for accreditation, that's in the first criteria, right, peer reviewers? So it's, you have your mission and then a strategic plan that builds on your mission. And then my trustees like to see key performance indicators built into that to see the progress that we're making on the plan. There are too many plans in business, not-for-profits, that sit on the shelf, and that's not a good plan. You know, it's active and alive. And I know, since I know you have plans, I do know that, but when it comes to, I'll give you another example, Moraine Valley. You know, Moraine Valley is another league institution. I worked with them for a number of years on strategic planning. That place knows how to throw a party. So after those two first parts, their opening session for their faculty in January, when they were coming back, was they had the trends all around the room, and they spent the time saying, so what does this mean for us? Any other comments about the trend?
Are student enrollment in community colleges across the country
Yes.
in decline?
Yes. It's the demographic issue, that there are less people coming in, the challenge of being able to afford any kind of college, which you have an advantage, obviously, over others. And the competition from those third-party providers, and I'm sure our presidents and faculty and others in here could add other issues. So, for example, in the state of Ohio, when I was at the state level, we had one institution, when performance-based funding come in, and with enrollment and everything, they improved their budget and their enrollment, they went up to 30,000 students from 20,000. I mean, it was like a 30% increase or close. But then when the recession was over, they had to fire people, because what happened is they ramped up personnel-wise at the high time. So think about it in your industry, up and down with the housing industry, and those kinds of things can impact. You have to think as far out as you can. But I say with any strategic plan, and those of you who've been to our conference have heard me say this, you have to plan for what you have no idea is going to come down the pike. So you can talk about these money as a helicopter parents. There's a new term, I don't know what it is, shout out if anybody knows it, that's worse than helicopter parents. Snow, yeah, snowplow?
Snowplow or bulldozer.
Well, I can tell you, I would get these calls, I'd go in when I was at a residential campus, and they would be all upset and telling, do this, do that. Now, it's so much easier when it's not your kids, by the way. When it's your own kids, you're all, that's a different situation. But I would say they'd call me as a president, and they'd say, I'm really worried about whatever, and I'd say, you have to let them grow up. You have to let them experience this. We get calls saying, I don't like the grade I got. That's not an accreditation issue, that's the student has to do with it. Only 18% of the complaints we get have anything to do with accreditation. And it's, I don't like my faculty member, I don't like the grade that I got, I'm not getting my transcript because I didn't pay for, the last several tuitions. Well, that's the only hook you have. So there's a lot of that going on. So the helicopter parent, where actually people come in and they want to sit in on a class, they want to go, if they're an employee, they actually want to go to their performance reviews. I'm like, are you kidding? You are not letting these people become citizens of our world if you do that. what I've heard you collectively say is, I'll use the term onboarding. When you come in as a trustee, I don't know enough about your onboarding, so if I'm saying everything you already do, just take that into account. You're going to get all the state rules and all the sunset laws and all those kinds of things. The onboarding part that many of us don't have time for is, let me get you to understand that we have colleges, 10 colleges, we have other kinds of things, 10, right?
Yes.
We have other things going on. We want to help you with that onboarding process. When you don't understand something, unfortunately, you may be inclined to go learn on your own. And I do want to encourage you to understand the governance versus operations issue if you go to something on a campus. That's awkward, and we can talk about that later. So if you think about this, you were animated during this discussion. Did you trust each other when you were listening? Did you respect what you were hearing? It's not political. You're talking about what stakeholder? You're talking about the student. And so if you can allow time for the discussions when you're making your decisions to feel this way somehow, then that's a great discussion. It was, and by the way, anybody watching out there would be very proud of your answers. That you talked about your awareness, whether it was helicopter, more in the weeds, or both. You care about these students, and I think that's important. Do you have any questions relating to these three questions and the trends that we talked about? I was told by the powers that be that sometimes it's good to give a break or a bio break. So, or just a mental break. We have 15 minutes in here. I'm sure that probably by 25 after we can get back. Is that all right with all of you? Okay, thank you so far for everything you've said. And on behalf of constituents and the importance of speaking with one voice. So I want to keep that in mind. You all have the PowerPoint in front of you. And then I want to move to the discussion of roles of the board, the chancellor. We might throw in presidents if needed. Not under the bus, just throw in.
Or spending and so forth. If I can't get the person to think about the importance of student success, then I'm not going to do well. That is my campaign, if you will.
So interestingly, what you're saying is what do you bring to the table, but also how you elephant in the room here, folks. So let's just put, that's the elephant. There's two elephants. They're both listed on this one. And the idea is, how do you represent your constituents, but not being, work together? Yes.
So the district I represent is very diverse. It goes from liberal to extremely conservative. So left, right. And I found when I ran, there were two things that were really important. One, not to misrepresent myself, because I wanted people to vote for me authentically, not tied to any political affiliation, which certainly running in a nonpartisan race is good, because people want to pigeonhole me, right? So that meant you had to be a lot of things to a lot of people. So again, being pretty authentic or straightforward. So, but there are undoubtedly constituents that have agendas that want to see where you stand with them. And I think how I came at it, and fortunately or unfortunately proved successful, was I generally agreed with positions, but I always gave a caveat. It didn't matter. And that was, you will not like how I vote all the time. You need to trust me to be inquisitive, use inquiry, discernment from what was in front of me, and we're going to part ways on occasion, but, and that's the way it will be. I mean, I had to be honest that I trend this way, but I don't know. And then I think it goes back to and I don't need to talk so long, the idea of listening. So, listening to your constituents, was it really football they wanted to talk about, or was it really how the decision was made? And being able to listen to the point that you could say, well, I support the idea of a football program, but I don't know how I would vote if I had the data in front of me. Because there's obviously information that might lead me to a different position, but until I get that, I wouldn't know. So instinctually, I might react one way, but I was pretty straightforward, and maybe somebody could call me on that, but I thought I was pretty straightforward to say, when I'm in the decision-making, I will have different data or the same data, and then I will make my decision, because that's what you're trusting me to do.
That's terrifically authentic, because that example alone comes from the heart of people loving a sport, and sometimes it's very good for the institution, sometimes it breaks the bank, and you've gotta have the data on that. That's.
So, I mean, I don't know, that's how I worked, and some people were on the right and some people were on the left, but I found that, that supported me, and in the end, I won every precinct but one. So, it must have resonated.
It's an admirable thing to be a public servant and to do what you're doing. And I know it's easy for people to criticize if they don't like your stance or something like that, but believe me, in today's world, obviously, for you to take the time and to do this is admirable. Presenting yourself authentically is obviously very important, because when you come here, you may not agree with what your constituents told you to do.
Right.
Or be in conflict with the rest of the board or the staff. Other comments? Yes.
I'm at large, so countywide, and although I do live, I think, in the most conservative, but I didn't, again, the nonpartisan thing, I did not run as I am a Republican, I didn't run as a Republican, and I got votes from both sides because I'm data driven, so I'm what are the numbers, what are the issues, I'm like a problem solver, strategic problem solver. I like strategic planning and what is the best way to solve the problem. And when you talk to constituents, everyone has an agenda if they're one party or another, but typically they've given you the vote, they've entrusted you, they've put you in there, and so even though they might have a political bias, letting them know what it is that you're gonna do that meets their needs, because they have a concern, they have a self-interest. So how do you let them know that what you're doing is in their self-interest to accomplish the goal that they wanna accomplish, even though they may not politically like that, they didn't like my vote to, let the union, or the FEC come back and have some kind of say. They didn't like that. I heard a lot from people on the conservative side. But it was in the best interest of the college to do that. And so I took a lot of heat for that, but I would stand by that decision. So it's being willing to do things that maybe politically are not favorable, but are in the best interest of the college. And those are hard. And it's not always easy to do that. But try to be fair.
Others, how do you balance it out? Linda?
Well, I think that, in many ways, this board is reflective of what's going on at the national level. And that we have difficulty compromising on things. And it would be wonderful if we could figure out a way of finding some common ground around issues. The open meeting law is challenging for us because it limits our ability to have the kinds of discussions that can identify the compromises. We have taken some steps in the last 6 months to bring committees back and to have agenda review and to do these kinds of sessions to provide us with more opportunity to talk things out. So, where Mrs. Wynn referenced the resolution from January, which did address shared governance and representation of the classified staff and a number of other issues. That was not perfect resolution. It was a resolution that involved compromise between some of the board members, but not all of the board members. Thus, the split vote that took place on that, as has happened with many other things that are consequential for us. So I think if we could figure out how to provide a vehicle for reaching compromise, we can avoid a lot of the split votes that we currently experience.
Good point. Because if you're split, there's an opening that people come in on, and that's tough times. It's almost like getting a cavity. There's a little bit of a gap, and then you get a little toxic, but groupthink isn't good either if it's a wrong decision. So you want to, and reconsidering a decision, as important as a meet and confer, was probably a good idea. But then the folks who wanted you to put that back in need to compromise too. And any ideas?
Just what I said earlier, we've been governing by resolution a little bit more than we probably should. But you move on with the best that you have. And whether it's going to be something you can sit in a local meeting and defend, or whether you're just going to say, you know, we're going to agree to disagree, and I'm not running again. So.
16 months.
Yeah.
I have a question. So when you're a board member, you have to take a vote, so it's not consensus modeling. It is
I mean,
actual.
it's not thumbs up and thumbs down, it's an actual vote.
Correct. So again, elephant in the room, interest-based negotiating does look at a blend of conversation to get you to more of a consensus model that's a link to visions, missions, strategies. I've had the opportunity to be trained in IBM, so I'm probably a little biased that way, but that is, so to Linda's question or statement, she'd like to see us get there, what methods do you see that can support boards, trustees, leaders to get to that more shared vision model of decision-making when you are dealing with elected officials?
Well, I would say I'm gonna go on the communication part of that, mediation and communication, a lot of similarities. And that's really cool that you got that training, that's relevant. If you reflect back on what someone else has said versus jumping to, I don't like what you said. So let's say Linda says, I think that, let's put it on the table, that we need to respect shared governance and keep the meat conferred in there. And someone comes back with the you versus I, you are wrong, you shouldn't say that, this is inappropriate versus, I hear what you're saying, let me, give you some suggestions, can you look at it this way? The language alone is really important. And we tend to jump on each other when there's a strong, passionate disagreement. And if you can pause, and I know those of us who are impatient, that's not that easy, or talking about active listening and all that. If you can pause and say, well, help me try to understand your perspective, let me give you my perspective, that can be very helpful in itself. We'll talk in a few minutes about rules of engagement. And I think it's important that if you have rules of engagement that you have adopted, that you can kind of remind yourself of violating this. I just jumped you and said, how could you possibly say that? Whatever those rules of engagement are yours, you put them together. So have when it's the, you were elected and yet it's different from what you think the decision should be.
No, I think it just goes, the only comment I have goes back to what you're saying, is that we need more opportunity to understand how others are voting, because it is important. So when we go back to the constituents and say, here's how the board voted, here's why they voted this way, and kind of get them to understand it, even though I may feel differently. this is how, but at least if you can help explain the way the vote went and why it went that way, I think we go a long way in just our community vision. But we don't have that opportunity, we haven't had that opportunity to kind of, we just, the discussion's not there, so we just vote, move on, and we're like, I can't vote. I've left saying, I don't understand how they voted this way.
I think that's an excellent point. Taking the time to really listen to each other, to try to understand it. If you need to delay a vote so you have that good input. And then the most important thing, which gets to the public image of the board, is it's almost like fasting. Between board meetings, practice not saying, this is how I felt and everybody else was wrong. And it really is like you have to work at that. That's a mind over matter kind of thing. There's a lot of you have business experience, but the blaming board, where you put up the names and say, okay, you just said something, and that's a blaming thing. We're gonna say, okay, you said something as a chancellor, wait a minute, you're blaming the board, and you said something, you're blaming the staff or each other, and it's like public shaming, but it's a blaming board, and you say, what's your ownership in it, and what can you contribute toward it? Those are kind of private notes you keep to yourself during the board meeting, but I think it's a very natural thing. It's a very, very natural thing to say, well, I don't fully understand it, and therefore it's hard to explain it to people, so then there's a solution for that. Work on the kinds of interactions that you really understand it as much as possible. And a lot of you mentioned data-driven decisions, etc. Let's get to a larger elephant in the room, and we're gonna do like a speed dating kind of thing. I'd like you to talk about the role of the chancellor versus a trustee, and then I'm gonna throw out a situation, have you yell out, trustee chancellor, and see if there's any ideas of agreement on that. So, and by the way, there's no right or wrong answer. We're just gonna lean toward them discussing when those conflicts, we know what that means. So, what's the basic difference between the governing board and the chancellor as far as roles and responsibilities?
Operations. One word answer.
Governance versus operations, and operations includes a whole lot.
The board should be focused on policy, besides its legal requirements, what things it approves.
We have one employee, the chancellor. That's our accountability.
Okay, let's.
Technically 1.5, because the council is shared by the chancellor.
Which half? I'm kidding.
The smarter, the best half.
Right down the middle, or?
Top half.
All right, so let's just do this exercise, and let's just try it, all right? There's a meeting at, let's just say, Paradise Valley. And the meeting involves an issue that you want to learn more about. Do you go?
Only by invitation.
By invitation by whom?
The chancellor's office.
Does that ever happen where that isn't the case?
No,
This is
depends on-
truth or dare time now.
Depends on the meeting.
Okay, give me an example.
If it's graduation. then-
That's not a meeting, and that's a good one to mention. That's, it's an event versus a meeting.
That's a tough distinction sometimes.
And how can you get to clarity?
I don't know that you ever do totally, but you learn from experience.
So let's give an example, if you don't mind. Give me an example of when it's something that is not a special event like commencement, that you think it's okay for a trustee to attend.
Well, let's see, student government.
If they're having a meeting of the student government, do you go through the chancellor or just go?
Depends on if I'm invited by the student government, then I'll just go.
Can we focus on that one for a minute?
Because I think you may be distinguishing between being invited and just showing up.
Actually, both. Because if you're invited and you go and the chancellor doesn't know about it, what are the possible problems with that?
Chancellor doesn't know about it.
miscommunication, someone could be presenting an idea and you respond to the idea, but you haven't checked to see where it fits in the schematic or the system thinking.
Excellent. Any others?
I just think that if we do anything, if we're responsible or accountable, that we should put everything through the chancellor. If I'm going to a campus, we should be letting them know I'm going to this campus and doing this, you know, whatever it is. Or I was invited, you know, and there's sometimes people in the community contact us and they want us to solve a problem. So I come through the chancellor's office to figure out where should that go and who do I give it to. I you know, probably more than I should, but I don't know where anything goes right now, so everything should go through for me, everything goes through the chancellor's office.
May I qualify my answer?
Of course.
I'm gonna again give kudos to the woman who's sitting behind me, and that's Donna. A lot of the requests for meetings go through her, and I'm presuming often because she's our secretary, that there's some knowledge or communication at that level. So I try to trend myself to answer through Donna, so that may presume that you know, or it's on a calendar somewhere. You know, the risk sometimes is people feel then you're not interested, but I'm trying to think of meetings I might have gone to without. I know there was one meeting I wanted to go to and I asked, and it was not a good idea at this time, so I chose not to go instead of presuming the role, but it is a little trippy sometime. The one thing I will throw in as a caveat for me is that the opinion of what decision or what action should come through my attendance, I need to discern on my own in many ways after getting input. But I try my best, and I'm a failed, flawed human being, so I make mistakes.
You're a human being.
Yeah, hopefully. And that, but it's my intention always to ensure that someone knows I'm participatory in that through the chancellor's office.
Who is the public voice of the board?
Should be right there.
By policy, it's the president.
So here's what I'm gonna recommend, what I've seen at other campuses. Large campuses, districts, huge universities. You do funnel it through the chancellor's office, and you have this person who represents the board, okay? It doesn't mean you don't show interest.
Correct.
In the public, at Rotary clubs, and all that kind of stuff, you may not be able to say to a Rotary club, if you want me to speak on behalf of Maricopa, but everything internally, let's start with internally, any meetings or anything here should be channeled through the chancellor's office. And if they tell you, we don't want you to go, then you have a right as trustees to get together and say, what are the parameters where if we don't agree, we would go? But I know very few campuses that trustees would go to anything without coordination with the president, if it's a president-based or chancellor-based. And then Maria would have an obligation to talk to the president. So it's not a lone decision. Here's a couple reasons. Your voice is weighted. Your voice carries up. You are the decision-making body. So your voice is weighted. So if you're on a campus and you say something, you could cause a lawsuit without even realizing it, right? And so you've got to be very careful. People, whether they agree with you or not, they recognize and respect the role that you fill. There are only 7 of you representing a huge amount of students. And if you're speaking to the Rotary and you've got talking points about really great things we could be pushing at the institution, terrific. If you're talking at the Rotary and they say, well, we'd like to ask you about a no confidence vote, what should your answer be? Anybody disagree with that? You have to say, I can't talk about it. There are things that you just can't talk about. Now, if you know, if your chancellor knows I'm just putting it all out here, if your chancellor knows and the presidents know that you've been invited to come to the student government, what they should do is serve you and give you information that would say, here's, like you said, there might be an occasion where don't step in a landmine, but also if you're going, let me give you the Maricopa perspective. Let me give you background so you know. Let me give you talking points if you want them, but also, it'd be nice to use them, but also let me give you some context and background so you understand it. So let's say that a program is going to be removed. That happens at campuses all the time. And people are upset that program's going to be removed. If you go through the chancellor's office, you'll have the data showing, should that happen or not happen? What's the decision based on? What are the program reviews been, et cetera? So I'm just suggesting that I think some of these issues that are challenges for you with central coordination, as one of you suggested, would be very helpful. And then you guys have to have an agreement. You have to have a really strong agreement between you as to who's where when. And you both know this. You've been in both seats. And so this gives you challenging insight. So let's throw out, go ahead, Linda.
So if you have a board member who is showing up at meetings to which they have not been invited, how do we self-police?
You self-police by stopping doing that. That should never be done. You should not go to a meeting that hasn't been funneled through the chancellor's office, and you should not go to a meeting that you haven't been invited to. Now, I know I'm making some people mad here, but I'm just gonna put it out there. That's gonna get you in trouble with your accreditor. That's gonna get you in trouble with your public. That's gonna muddy up the interest. So for example, if you know that there's a big real estate presentation that, because you have that background, that would be very exciting, or one on student success, then you can say, you know, I read about this, I haven't been invited, I'm interested. Those are positive reasons you would want to be invited. Let's say it's because you don't like the way something's being run at a college, and so you show up at the meeting to do that. And look, I know that happens, so let's just put that out there. I would like you to think about this. In your businesses or the work that you do, would you want someone just showing up? When you had an agenda prepared and you were ready and you knew you were going to interact with different people, would you want someone just showing up?
I hated it when my board would do that. I had a board, number of people, and if they were representing an organization, I wanted to know that they were doing that.
And I think it's the same as, you won't know that I went to the college in the Vietnam era, but I think it's the same as showing up if you're a staff member or faculty member. I know there's public rules, but if it's a private meeting, if you're having an executive committee meeting or whatever you call it of your staff, or on the president's campuses, I want you guys to raise your hand who are presidents. Do you agree with the way this discussion is going? Has it ever caused you problems when someone has just shown up on your campus? Be brave.
They're saying yes. Causes a moment of panic, could be.
Yes. So, for example, nobody wants HLC to be on their campus, okay? That's why I tried to start this as, this isn't an HLC visit. This is a let's talk and move forward visit. But I remember when I was told, we had a president it was a federation of schools when I was at Antioch, and we had a president who would just think he could say something and that would be equally weighted with what a faculty member said or a staff or anybody. And we had to teach that person that even if it's coming from the heart, your voice is weighted. If a trustee says it, that means something very seriously. So if you're out for coffee and someone says, okay, let's go back 100 years or whatever and say there's a president at one of the campuses. Now, I don't like that president. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. That's a no-no. That's an absolute no-no. So this takes a lot of practice and control, but I'm asking you, I'm not telling you, I'm asking you, do not show up at any meetings you're not invited to. And as you suggested, coordinated through the chancellor, and then I'm asking the chancellor and the presidents to do the preparation work to help the board members speak with a single voice, but also know what they need to express their opinion. So if I, let's say there was a meeting of, there are different terms at different places, but a governance body of the faculty, okay? A non-union, but still a body of the faculty. And you show up and someone sees you there, it changes the whole tenor of the meeting. So they need to know that if they want you there, they're gonna go through the chancellor. And then you need to decide rules of engagement of trustees. If the chancellor says that's not a meeting you should go to, you are the decision-making body. Do you agree with that? But you nailed it. Operations, governance. Operations, governance. And that's the toughest thing to deal with. And there are examples that have impacted some of these things. So rules of engagement are very important. Yes?
One quick question. What about when the board member says it's a public meeting and I'm going out as a private citizen?
I don't want to violate any rules, but to people here, your private citizen is irrelevant. You are a board member who's been elected, and that's the, rules or not, that's the image that's going to be seen. I don't see you as private citizen. I see you as a person who has a vote.
And so back to Linda's question, how do we self-police that? If a board member says, well, I'm going to that as a private citizen?
I think the rest of the board needs to have a talk. I think you need to operate as a team and have a talk, and with the team member and say, I appreciate your passion, be empathetic, of course, but that sends a wrong message. There should be one public voice for the institution, and if the voice is to have, and then for the colleges have to be able to do this too, that if let's say a legislator wants your opinion, and you're elected. Now this is a conundrum for you, because, you know, you're both elected, right? And they want to get your opinion. Bring the chancellor with you if you go. Don't go alone. And I know that's difficult, but you have been given a great responsibility of duty, care, and loyalty, to use the terms of governance. And let's take the loyalty part. You send a mixed message out to your public, and you've just heard Maricopa. Even if you're right, and it comes from the heart. Boards that are effective boards do not go to meetings where they're not invited, and coordinate their presence on a campus through a central office, and coordinate any points they might make as part of another speech outside or engagement through the institution. I've been a president. The last thing I would want is someone speaking to a Rotary and someone says, there's a problem with enrollment at University of Rio Grande. What's going on? I would want to say, you know, that's a very valid question, and here's what we understand, and here's some talking points, but beyond that, you know, it's important. Now, you're all pretty quiet, not totally quiet, but what I'm saying is really important. Really important. All right, so the information gathering slide that was on previously about who gathers the information and all that, who makes the decisions, these are things that can be solved through rules of engagement. They can be called, you probably got some of this in your mediation, right? Different terms, maybe principles of operation, rules of engagement. These are things that are really important. And this is something you should do as a board. So I'm only going to give you some context for it and ask you to strongly consider doing this. We might come up with a couple today, all right? Involvement in meetings, and the boards benefit from this kind of thing. Why would it be advantageous to have rules of engagement?
Sets parameters, boundaries, so we know.
It creates consistent behavior, and also gives us opportunity to be accountable. And that's where I think sometimes we fail.
And through the cool program that you just went through, what would they say about having rules of
I went through
engagement?
IBN training a while ago, so it's not.
That you went through within your lifetime.
Which is also equally long. I lost the question in my own conversation.
So
Sorry.
at the time you were learning about mediation, what would people who have any mediation training or expertise say about rules of engagement? Good, bad?
Oh, that they become the Bible for behavior.
That's it. So you put your hand on that Bible, you do the rules of engagement, and you know what? Getting to those rules of engagement will not happen overnight.
It's hard work.
What are your committees that you have?
We have policy committee, budget and finance, and charter schools.
Okay. I don't know if that would fall under any of them, but if it fell under any of them, or you might try.
Policy.
Probably policy, and you might try some of the others looking at them and feeding into that, but to get a smaller group kind of looking at this and then bring it to a larger group, or you're not a very large group in itself, but because there's so many people watching you, it makes it hard to just do these kinds of things. So if you were to say, okay, rules of engagement should be not subtle, you all said this, however it is, you're talking about students. So you can put that through the lens. How can you engage productively? You've given a lot of good examples about that. How should you engage with the campuses, the leadership, the faculty, the staff, and external stakeholders? What are the lines that should not be crossed? I gave you one. It doesn't mean you're gonna do it, but I'm telling you, it is a red flag for good governance. How do we assess and monitor our own behaviors and outcomes? That was asked. How do we make sure we're doing this? And what are the best ways to speak with one voice? Okay, all of that impacts this, the image of the board. Because the image of the board, I want for you that your image be as strong as the reputation of Maricopa, academically and innovation and all those kinds of things. So it impacts policies and practices, because if you're interpreting things differently, it's problematic. It focuses on the students, it creates a narrative in student success, and the policy decisions on accreditation as well. So before I get into this very interesting topic on accreditation, which will show you some of these things, I want to spend time on the rules of engagement. So take your pencils and papers, and let's take a good 10 minutes and start saying what you think a good rule of engagement would be for the board. By the way, anyone in the audience, you should maybe do this too. Especially the presidents, what do you think the good rules of engagement are for the board? We're not gonna ask you to say it here, but just so you know.
You can give it to us afterwards. Through the chancellor's office.
I know you're gonna keep writing, and that's just fine. Let me give you some ideas about how we could have this discussion. One, I think everything you say should be available to Maria, so I would suggest you, anything you've written as far as rules of engagement, you make sure you're gonna take some notes about these, but then in case she misses anything, that you send it to her, what you think, or any post thoughts you've had on this. And nobody's idea is a bad idea, and let's just go from there. What are some ideas of a rules of engagement? And when you present it, please explain why, what the impact would be by following this rule of engagement.
My first one I mentioned earlier, and that is we need to have one spokesperson for the board. Particularly recently, I know there are a lot of conversations going on in the public arena. One board member is saying this, one. So I believe we need to agree as to who our spokesperson is and let that person be the public voice of the board.
That usually is the chair, the president.
No, I
That's our
agree.
policy.
That's
our policy.
Yeah. But and then hold ourselves accountable to doing that. Accountability for me is huge. I think we stumble on that.
So one thing we can do is we do these rules of engagement, and then you start thinking about how can we hold ourselves accountable for the ones that you agree upon when you get to that point.
Thank you.
Others?
Be nonpartisan.
And explain why. I mean, I know some of this can
We
be
are by
obvious.
law a nonpartisan board, and we run in nonpartisan races. Yet too often, decisions appear to be made on a partisan basis, not on the basis of necessarily what's best for students or best for the college district.
Thank you. Others?
There's a rules, I did a process, so there's a request, it requires a response from the chancellor, so whatever request, whether it comes from the outside in or we have a request to go someplace, because that's an example. And then there's an action or communication that happens after that response, so the response is, no, you can't go do that, then you communicate that back to the original source, or if you can do it, then you take an action and you go do the thing, so that it's consistent, request, response, communicated action.
And when you talk about how can you be accountable, sometimes this puts the chancellor in a tough spot because you are here and she's here on the chart. But nevertheless, you can hold the chancellor accountable for those decisions if somehow are those the outcomes, and make sure that that's okay.
Can I give an example? So, recently I had a request about kids in foster care. So I called the chancellor and she put me in touch with someone on her staff who works with that. And then we had a meeting on that, and then we communicated that to the original person that asked about it. So that was like, but I didn't know who to talk to in the college. So and she said, here's what they're doing. So we're still working on that, but it's like just something to solve the problem, and it works. So it's
good. Other rules of engagement ideas?
I think there's a difference between listening and speaking. And how you handle that.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, oftentimes you're in a position to listen, not to give any kind of response. You're just there to learn, as opposed to going into a situation where you do the speaking. As you said, you come, whether you want to or not, you come with a different weight. You don't when you're listening normally.
Well, the weight if you're listening is, you may not feel you carry the weight, but the people who are in the room do, because they respect that you are a board member. And so, I'll give you a less personal example. I'll talk about HLC, okay? When I wasn't a president of HLC, I would, like anybody, always talk to anyone from HLC to just They just listen, but I let them listen to what I wanted to say. So if I would say something about my school so they might remember it at the right time. Or I would make a comment about a policy about to come up, so they would listen to it at the right time, but I was trying to influence. People do this to HLC all the time. I cannot use a restroom during our conference. Because there's no opportunity, short of the actual, people wanna talk. And so if you're there listening, give me an example of a meeting that you might just be listening.
A student meeting.
And, okay, so.
Thank you. You were
Yeah,
listening.
was that timing? So I would ask this question, help me understand, us understand that listening doesn't come with a weight to it.
Well, I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying it has less weight than if you're there speaking to the group of students.
And if you're listening, do you think the chancellor has a right to know you're in that room?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we meet with the chancellor once a month, and my philosophy has always been anything that I've heard or had discussions with, she needs to know about. Sometimes it's the next day with an email, sometimes I wait till the month.
That's a very important point, that the loyalty between and among you is that you share what you've heard. Do you have a time during your board meeting where you give here's the outreach we've done? Where you actually come?
We do have board member reports.
Okay.
But we are limited in Arizona to some degree. It's one of those areas that often gets breached. I hear about that. But, it's information, not comment. It's kind of the difference between the two.
Well, that's why you have lawyers to help you understand that
No
difference,
question.
if there's any lack of clarity.
Can I ask a question on that? The shared information, yes, we do have the board reports, and I really appreciate that, and I'm still learning what's appropriate, what's not. I make no bones about that. But I'd like to give an example of where I got caught off guard because we didn't share information. And that was because of our positions, a lot of us receive calls or interactions with legislators, congresspeople, et cetera. So I received a call from one who said, so I heard this, and I want to know where you stand, and I visited with so-and-so, and blah, blah, blah. Well, number one, I didn't know the person had an interaction with a fellow board member. Two, what the position of the board member was in speaking to that person. And three, now I was being called on to give a point of view and an opinion. So it goes back to how could I have known that, first of all, that the person went and spoke to a legislator, which I did not know. Secondly, the position that was stated was probably different than mine would have been, hence why they called me. And I was very uncomfortable and felt that we do not function that way. We get a report maybe, what we do, not maybe, of the interactions the chancellor has based on her visits, but no one else. And regardless of the point, and we as a board never discussed what our position would be on that issue to begin with. So number one, we didn't have that discussion. Number two, people were asking, interacting on their own behalf, however they had told you. So I don't know if you and the person coordinated to say, this is the board's disposition and that's why we're going to have this. The idea that someone was a private citizen trickled down to me. And I just thought it was all very passive aggressive, disingenuous. It goes back to my point is where I started from a point of trust and now I'm becoming less trustful. And I don't like being in that position. Number one, representing my constituencies. Number two, being an actively engaged member with this group. That needs to change for me.
So.
That's an excellent example, and you've just made the communications, the government relations people, the board chair and the chancellor happy by bringing that up.
Oh, good.
When it comes to government relations and when it comes to personnel issues or other kinds of things, you may choke on it, but you have to say, I really appreciate the question, I respect your interest, let me get back with you on the board's position. When it comes to personnel, same thing, I respect your question, but I cannot address anything related to personnel. And your HR people would be happy that I said that, lawyers on all counts. Your communications people, there has to be a board message. Now, I'm not childish about realizing that there are coffee moments, you're gonna have coffee with someone, you're gonna be at a party, someone's gonna ask your opinion. Practice, 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 giving those kind of responses and come up with a board response. So let's take one, let's make an example. This is from one of my, someone I did some coaching with. They wanna outsource a bookstore, okay? And there's a strong opinion in that region that you only have people and businesses from that region. You cannot have anybody from the outside. So everybody had different conflicting opinions on this, and everybody shared it with the community. That didn't help. That didn't help the situation. Many of you talked about having data to look at before you reach a decision. So let's say in that decision, the data was that you're gonna save a whole lot of money if you do that, and the institution needed to save money, then the personal agenda of, I'm afraid someone's going to lose a job, or it has to be a local business, has to be tempered. That's difficult, but it has to be tempered. Let's take one that we all face, raising tuition, okay? So you're gonna have the discussion about raising tuition. What board member wouldn't want to be the one to go back and tell their constituents or publicly, I'm gonna vote against that? But if you raise the tuition by $15, let's say, and it's going to bring the institution ahead in a time when state decided not to give you any money, then that's gathering evidence before you tell your voters what the outcome is. So the shared voice will require a lot of tongue biting at times, where you say, I'm gonna get back with you, I wanna find out more information, I wanna see where the board stands. And then the rules of engagement can be respecting that you report out if you've had any of these kind of interactions. It's difficult not to know that there's different opinions, and the goal, I'm sure, is to get you back to trust, not further away from it. What other rules of engagement?
I've been pretty good at going to the office of the president and let him know I'm on campus for one reason or another. Sometimes it's just to go to the bathroom.
And you have to say that quickly sometimes.
Or you come in after you've taken care of it. I think it's just important that, I know that, well, most people, especially students, don't know you from a hole in the wall.
Right.
So you can get by with some things. And faculty and staff, not so much. So it's respectful that, for whatever reason you're on, maybe it's a football game.
Great idea. It is a great idea. My own experience when I worked for my first state job was the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Ed. I learned early on, you never show up on a campus and don't let the president know you're on the campus, because it makes them nervous.
But
It's just like, what's the motive?
I'm on one particular campus every day because I'm a student. And so I quit.
You don't have to report that. You just have to do good.
3.75.
That's very good.
3.75. He's not bragging. It's a fact.
He's earned bragging rights on that.
No, it is interesting to be a student. You learn a lot of things.
You are going to learn a lot. You're a secret shopper. There's no question.
And we've had board members that have assisted other people in relatives, primarily in registering. That's a learning experience as well, good or bad.
Just let the people know you're on their campus. Those are not drawing the line in a bad way. Just let them know you're there. I don't know that you have to report on sports events. It's a courtesy. Linda, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have certain things I'd like to say. One, to follow up Dana's point, yes, we should let the president know that we're on the campus, but also having been a president, board members shouldn't assume that presidents are going to drop everything and, you know, meet with them because they happen to be on the campus. I would add that board members need to do their homework and they need to participate in the business of the board. So when we have work sessions, scheduled months in advance, people need to show up. And also, I would add that, kind of related to the conversation of reporting out what you've heard, that a public board meeting isn't necessarily the first place you should be reporting that out. In other words, don't surprise the chancellor with a zinger.
Yeah, no surprises.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, I go back 24 years, K-12 too. We used to have board meetings in K-12 that lasted, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. Here, our actual board meeting can be 10 minutes. The average is probably less than half an hour, once a month. So a lot of that discussion doesn't happen now. We've gone back to having a meeting the week before our board meeting to go through the agenda, which gives us a chance to be more, we sit like this, less formal than sitting at the dais. All that being said, it's never, and I'm not saying 8-hour meetings, essentially, especially when 5 of them decide what color to paint the gym. We're not that level, that's an operational level. But I do think that spending more time as a board is how the best way to get to know the board, get to know the chancellor, as opposed to, you know, how fast can we get out of here and on the road.
Well, and I don't come after me on this one, but even if you added a half hour or whatever, and you talked about a special topic that mattered to you, there are ways that interaction helps you get to know people.
Right.
Other suggestions on rules of engagement?
I think just, like we're trying to do with rules of engagement, just kind of making sure that we all have the same understanding of the task, you know, who the student is, who's the, you know, what our mission is. You know, I know we have our mission statement, but, you know, how are we getting there? And as a group, if we can agree on those kind of things, I think that'll go a long way. Instead of scattered shot everything, we have more of a.
Yeah, so make it mission-focused decision-making.
I had another question going back about as we interact with other folks. What about when our different lives intersect? I mean, as a school counselor, there's a lot of things that I'm doing with the high school district that it will be impacted by what happens at the college. You know, how do we navigate that?
Well, I think that's an excellent point. You balance it out by just being informed. Whatever you're gonna do in that normal sense of operations, you ask from the chancellor's office, you know, backup. So, materials, things that could help you understand it. So give me a specific example.
Well, dual enrollment, for example. I've been working with Phoenix Union quite a bit because I coordinate the dual enrollment for Phoenix College at my high school. And so working with Phoenix Union to coordinate the Phoenix Union half of it, but then working with Dr. Fisher and Provost about how do we help tweak and because of the experience I have, how we can tweak and make the dual enrollment issues work more smoothly from the community college side. So I'm working with, you know, both sides, one as a counselor and coordinator of dual enrollment, and the other one as a board member and how it all impacts the college.
You know, that's a very natural kind of thing, and let's, HLC's favorite topic, dual enrollment, and people who work here understand why I said that. But you would want to just know the things that come from accreditation or faculty qualifications or all those kinds of things, and then you're an expert, you're feeding information back. This is what we're hearing, this is what we're seeing. I think we don't wanna go overboard on this. I mean, you've got your normal lives and you've got those kinds of things that you do, and if you were still selling houses or something and someone said, what do you think about Maricopa? That's where you say, oh, that'd be a great place to live because, you know, it's a great institution. But of course, yours is very specific. I think that actually is a very beneficial part of your role. Because you're talking about the operations not as a trustee, but what can you learn as a trustee that can help those operations and then feedback? That's very normal. But when in doubt, talk to the chancellor about it.
I just want to dovetail into what Marie said. I get calls here from people that say, blah, 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 someone said this, someone said that. And gossip can be really very detrimental. And I try to say, you know, we're in a process now, so we can't talk about this, but also, you know, if you have a concern about where people are voting, you know, you can reach out to the board members, they're, you know, send them an email or call them, but try not to perpetuate whatever story they're calling and telling me, because they will say, this person said this, and then it creates division, and I like to get things from the source. And so, but people have said things that I haven't followed up with or said that to another board member, because I didn't want to perpetuate, and I also didn't want to, while we're in this process, just really, I wanted to get the facts in front of me and then have the discussion. And so there's been, because of the stuff in the paper, there's been a lot more people involved in this and a lot more people with positions reaching out, and they know that we're going to be making a decision. And so it's been labor intensive, I would say, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. People know me. I don't just have one district, so I did run countywide, so I've had probably more calls. But just trying to really be fair about the process, and that is what has been difficult. And not throwing another board member under the bus. We do have different political points of view, but we have a task at hand. And so I just, it has not been easy, and there's people that are in different sides of the aisle politically for me, but just, they want to talk about this and stir it up, and for both sides, and to not engage in that. And sometimes it's like if it's someone you know and you care about, you want to, because it's just a natural thing, oh, yeah, and you can't do it, and it's hard.
It is hard. I feel your pain. I've offended the national press repeatedly by not talking about things that they wanted me to talk about. And, I mean, everything from the Washington Post, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, they'll ask and I'll say, I'm sorry, I can't comment on that. And they'll say, well, yeah, but. I said, no, I actually mean I can't comment on that. HR, personnel issues, policies that haven't been passed yet that need to go through their normal process. So none of these things is clearly black and white. You have friends, you have people you interact with. Your position is a very honorable, privileged position, and it's a matter of living up to the responsibilities that come with that as far as the awkwardness of some of these situations. What I'd like to do now is spend some time, if I may, well, I'm going to ask about next steps, but on this one I'm going to ask about next steps. What can you do as far as next steps on rules of engagement?
Being the person I am, I've been clamoring for a retreat. And hoping we can schedule one to work through how do we get to that more collaborative model of rules of engagement, for example. Do we all agree on key elements for points of discussion? By the way, my example wasn't tied to any personnel issues out there. It was more tied to legislative agendas, just for the record. But, so that's where I would like to see us go, is make a commitment to spend the time on some of these under the auspices of a retreat and have the opportunity for more open discussion, certainly with this facilitator and anyone else who we felt could be invited to contribute to that. I would be open and eager to have.
Ditto.
Yeah. I think the people here, I'll say yes.
Would it be possible to say that by a certain date you will have rules of engagement?
Sure. Accountability is cool.
Yeah.
It's just we have to coordinate our cameras.
Yeah, and had an issue. Clarity.
All right, well, I think that's, I applaud you all. I think this has been a productive conversation. I'm gonna share some information now and then answer questions related to this information. And some of you have said that I can be a dynamic speaker. I don't. I am going to make this not boring. We're just gonna put it like that. Once upon a time, there was accreditation. And the purpose of accreditation is quality assurance. It wasn't until the Higher Ed Act passed in the 60s that it was tied to federal financial aid. So at the heart of accreditation and the heart of the work that we do is quality assurance. And I think this is from an article I wrote. I know Linda shared it with some of you in the past, but I just want to walk through it a little bit. There are 7 regional accreditors. You happen to be a member of the one that's the largest. We cover 19 states. If any of you had the exciting experience of following negotiated rulemaking, if that goes through, they would like us to report those states where we also have a presence as an additional location or campus that's not within our current region. So we will remain regional accreditors, and we will have a map on our site that says HLC covers 48 states. But our members are in 19 states. We're not obligated to take any applications or other institutions. So we solve this in a way that basically nothing changes. We're just putting some information up. How these states were divided goes back a long time to distance for how travel and all that with peer reviews. And peer review is a very important part of what we do. Sometimes we get challenged at the federal level. Well, I'm scratching your back, you're scratching mine. No, we do not send somebody who used to work at an institution, affiliated with an institution, even knows the person at the top and has a good relationship with the institution. There's a whole conflict of interest approaches to who we send out. It's not about deal making. There's no deal making in accreditation. It's about following the standards. So it's important to note that just within your region, this is now $30 to $40 billion annually in student aid. So there's something called the triad, where it's the Department of Education, the accreditor, and the states. It's interesting working with the states. Yours is an interesting state to work with. And we do know people at the state level. We don't get involved in anything political. However, we will weigh in if it's going to impact accreditation. So when Illinois pulled the budget and just was messing it up, we wrote the governor and all the legislators and said, we're a nonpartisan organization, but there are consequences to your institutions related to accreditation if you keep hurting higher ed. So we were able to work that in. I don't know, it made an ounce of difference, but we think it helped a little bit. So it's a voluntary process, but that voluntary really should be in quotes, because if you're not accredited by a regional or any of the few national accreditors that exist, you don't get your federal financial aid. And so really, we don't close institutions, but if we withdraw accreditation, which is a final sanction, and it doesn't happen often, but if we do that, that means the institution no longer gets federal financial aid. Yes?
Barbara, besides the 7 national, there's a lot of smaller ones.
There's over 100 altogether, yes.
And some of them here in the valley are able to get federal student aid because they're accredited by one of those non-7 member groups, and they advertise it as such.
There are about 10 or 12 national accreditors, and it might be for Bible schools or for distance learning or for career education. There are specialized accreditors that ties to nursing and licensure, and there are programmatic accreditors that don't tie to a license. Those last 2 don't get federal financial aid. It's the whole institution. So national and regional accreditors are institutional accreditors. All right. So the accreditation and quality assurance, we have decision-making bodies that include representatives of our accredited institutions and a sampling of public members. On our board, we have a large majority that are CEOs of institutions, but we also have faculty, and we have C-suite people like provosts. okay? And I'll tell you why the faculty representation is so fantastic. Most of them have been peer reviewers. They've been to institutions. They bring the voice of the student from that perspective. They're not tethered with all the administrative background. But the reason I have the greatest board on the face of the earth is because there's so many that have been institutional presidents or are, that there's no governance versus operations issues at all. And when I first got there, I said, boy, I'm never gonna go back to a college. I've gone to heaven. But these are normal things that all institutions deal with. And the public members, for example, on ours, we have 2 people from the military. We have someone who used to be a representative. She worked at the state level, but she also was an elected official in her state. So they bring a really rich background and a different perspective. It's hard work. So you talk about the importance of being prepared. There are thousands of pages they read. When they look at Maricopa College, because we do not accredit you as a district, when they look at Maricopa College, they're looking at the self-study that the school does, the team response, the team report from the visit, the response that the institution gives, and all the backup. So let's say we're not talking about you, and we got thousands of input from the community at another community college in this state. The board has access to all of that. So we do not filter the information and say, well, that was a silly complaint. They get to see all of it. But the most important parts are the self-study, where that's good reading for you because then you're seeing what the college is saying about itself. And then the team report, which is very important. All right, and by the way, the school's response sometimes changes what would go to the board, because if they corrected something, then it softens if there's any possible problems. The board does not see cases that don't have a decision that need to be made. The majority of the decisions are just staff level decisions. Everything's fine because the team puts in a report. But if a criterion is not met, then it has to go to the board to be considered for a possible sanction. There's an intermediary stage for us. We call it the IAC, the Institutional Actions Council. You've had membership on it. You have membership on that. By the way, I'm looking at the colleges, encouraging people to be on peer review is is best education you're ever gonna get. And we need more finance people and lawyers. I wouldn't say in life we need more lawyers, don't be offended, but and those would not be used for your type of institution. It'd be where there's a more complex business transaction. So this isn't small writing. I just want to tell you, if you go to this website, you will see policies. We have policies that are our criteria for accreditation, and we have a self-reporting system. This is not the same at all regionals, where you report. So for example, on the faculty qualifications issue, it's always been required that you have at least 18 hours at the graduate level or a master's degree in that area. So someone who has I can teach K through 12, you would have to have 18 hours or a master's in whatever you're teaching. But we found out through certain things that came out of the assurance system that we weren't always getting the best reporting on that. So we moved it into criteria. So there are different kinds of things. Federal compliance, we are sometimes accused of asking for things that are very annoying from the federal government, and we are told by our members in every survey, get back to quality assurance. But we are required to ask these things. Some of it's silly. If you send the Clery Act to the federal government, why do we have to check to see if you sent the federal government the Clery Act? And in the current administration, they're trying to help us declutter that a little bit, which will be helpful to you. When people talk about the cost of accreditation, sometimes they'll say, oh, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's interesting how people say, because I had to hire a director of assessment. Okay? Well, if you had to hire a director of assessment, you weren't, however, you needed to do that anyway. So sometimes it's dragged in. But the cost is not outrageous, and it's based on a formula that I think is reasonable. I am saying that even before I was at HLC. So if you have something that is institutional change, so for example, if you want to move into offering bachelors of nursing, you have to come through us for that. and you have to come through your state. You probably have to come through the nursing accreditation as well. It doesn't have to be an arduous process. I certainly am committed to making it a less arduous process, but if you suddenly you're approved to offer associate's degrees and you're offering bachelor's, or if you're bachelor's to master's or beyond, then you have to come to us, yes.
Okay, so you're saying we have 2-year degrees, but you're saying if we wanted to go to a 4-year degree? Is that what
If you
want?
choose in certain areas, like nursing's a popular one, because in most cases, that bachelor's is required in many jobs. And some community colleges made the decision to do that. The impolite term for that, but the one in the industry is mission creep. So if you're moving into another area, yes, you have to get our approval, you just can't offer that. The other kinds of things that if you open another branch campus somewhere, you have to let us know. Now, through the federal government, that's gonna be more reporting than anything else, but yes.
Over the years, you've been here for more of our colleges that implemented an online program.
Right.
That's different. Expanding that into, as I said earlier, the trends in how we deliver instruction. What requirements does HLC have when it comes to the flexibility of a college in terms of how they deliver instruction, whether it's the credit-based, the Carnegie unit, the C-time?
Well, let's divide that up a little bit. The credit hour is a federal formula. If you use PLA, which is direct assessment prior learning, then that requires more approval than over here, because we just have to make sure you have a policy and you're following it. And we get visited by the Office of the Inspector General on these things. Like, we approved some wonderful programs at University of Wisconsin, and there was confusion because some rules that we were being held accountable to hadn't come out yet. And they were terrific, they understood that, it worked out fine. But you have to let us know that, because we want to make sure, and you would never do this, you're not setting up a degree mill. And direct assessment is looked at by the federal government and by us as you're taking a responsibility of saying that person has learned something and knows something, and it's not tied to the credit hour. But you have to award so many credits because that's tied to federal financial aid, so how do you do that? You can get blanket approval, I imagine you already have it, but it's by colleges. So I know for sure Rio Salado had blanket approval for online learning. And I think it was if you have 2 programs, and now it's gone to, it might even go to 1 program, that you've proven you can do it, and then go ahead. So we try not to get in the weeds too much with that.
How about like Western Governors, where it's a competency-based program, and you're finished with the program, or the class, when you've mastered those competencies?
Well, we don't get, competency-based, if you're first into competency-based, you come to us, and after that, you don't have to keep coming. But the Western Governors is a good example, because there was a large lawsuit, or a large fine that was levied that went away. They do a terrific job.
In Northern Arizona, there's another close to us that does that for some of their programs.
Right. And see, what happens is, we tend to, those that question things tend to look at the worst-case scenario. So if you're talking, you talk about being equal and fair and nonpartisan, we have to be agnostic. I have nothing against for-profit colleges at all. And when you bring because there's good and bad actors in every sector. There's bad actors in community colleges, there's good actors in community colleges. So when we look at these things, we get peer reviewers who have experience, and when it's time for a visit, they go out to a campus. And I would imagine you're on the open pathway, so you get less visits. Yes?
We were one of the first.
Okay. You were when it was a pilot of the first several. Okay, got it.
Has that been successful?
That's been so successful, I think there are too many schools on it. So I think we need to look, it won't impact you, of course, but we have to look a little more closely. There are some that seem to have gotten in it a little quickly, but it's been successful. Let's look at it this way. Does differential accreditation work? And it does. And I think part of what we're studying at HLC is, should we do it by sector? We're going to be asked, no matter how hard we try, to have some bright lines. All right? Bright lines meaning graduation rates and job placement, things like that. We're trying to keep it as general as possible, because that never accounts for student intent. and hasn't accounted for transfer, which is ridiculous. So if you add transfer to your numbers with iPads federally, which is not a good data system, your numbers would go way up. And there's more than one league school that has like a 10% graduation rate, but they're transferring the heck out of that school into a local university.
Without a degree.
Without a degree. But if it's not an official certificate or a degree, it is considered a non-complete. And we could all get on a high horse about how ridiculous that is. The last thing I wanted to tell you is about the sanctions. The first sanction is notice. And that says to you, okay, it looks like you could fall out of compliance. And we're gonna give you a couple of years to get back into that, and we're gonna check on you, all right? There's gonna be follow-up. The next one is probation, which means you are out of compliance. That you are not meeting, there are 5 criteria, and if you don't meet this criteria, then you're out of compliance. All you need is 1, and you go on probation. Now, I will say, and I know this sounds silly, I can't tell you how many schools that have gone on probation, then gotten off of it, and come back and said that's what they needed. It pushed them a certain way, they got their finances together, you know, all kinds of things. But nobody wants it, but it's the idea of probation is you're still accredited, your students still get federal financial aid, but you have to work on something. So obviously the good thing is to work on them before you're gonna be evaluated.
Our sister system has gone through that, and we learned from their situation as much as it happened here. So
And it was very public.
It was.
It was
As
very
should-
public.
As it should be. I mean,
Right.
that's how it works.
Yes, I had just come in when that happened. It was one of my many good welcomes, so. I got to know 2 large community groups through looking at their readings. And then the next one is show cause. That means you've got about 6 months to tell us why we should keep your accreditation. And this is, I want you to know when the HLC board meets, it's painful to put anyone on a sanction. Show cause is torture, because there are institutions that just aren't succeeding. A lot of them are small privates. Sadly, there's some that are either HBCUs, historically black colleges, universities, or in cases, sometimes it's a small state institution where it's just gotten gobbled up by the rest of the state, or the money's gone down. And so there are several areas we look at, and those are all on our website. You know, we clearly are looking at mission, governance is part of it, assessment, student learning, finances, sustainability, all those kinds of things are part of what we review.
Remember the Native American colleges here, there's 3 or 4 of them, are they HLC accredited?
They are that, or they are through some national accreditor, but yeah, we've got that, we've got them. There are only 37 in the country, and we have some for sure. So the importance of your role that we look at, and this is from the article I wrote, leadership first, service, strategic directions, accountability. I put the term the common good in because you are public, and you know, that's important. When Wisconsin had a former governor, they took out the term public good from the University of Michigan's mission. They said it was an error, an editing error, and then they put it back in. I'm not making any comments on that, except to say that for public institutions, the common good is important.
He's not a governor.
And, yes. So what are the issues you need to consider in your role and those that impact the CEOs, and when might they be in conflict? And we've already talked about that. So these apply to a collective way of looking at Maricopa. We do not accredit the district, but you have one board, so the board's actions are taken into account when every one of your colleges go through accreditation.
So, Mark, with 9 years I've been on board, every year it comes up, and I'm not asking you to make a recommendation, but what's the advantages of staying 10 independently accredited or being 1 accredited 5?
Well, it's a production. I think Rufus wanted to go because he felt it was a shared budget. In many ways, it was centralized and then decentralized. I think there's advantages and disadvantages. I can't say as a whole because, or is it, this is a common practice and therefore it should go this way or the other. It's whatever works best for you. But if you are accredited as a whole and anything goes wrong at any one campus, you've now impacted the whole Maricopa district, so keep that in mind.
We wouldn't, under this situation,
Under which situation?
can individually, if one of them goes upside down for some reason, that wouldn't affect the other 9?
It would.
Yeah. Regardless of whether we're singly.
Right, exactly. Did I leave anything out? So you have the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. And these are terms that are well explained in all kinds of board publications. Let's talk about this. What are the external influences that can throw a board off? We've talked about a little bit among ourselves, but individual agendas or agendas of opinion leaders that could be elected, donors and athletic boosters trying to influence your decisions that may not be as relevant here, but donors could be. Community groups weighing in too frequently on the mission and direction when it's your role. Individuals, businesses, K through 12, anyone who has their own agenda who tends to try to influence your board. Detractors of presidents, chancellors, and any attempt to preempt the governance oversight of college trustees. And I wrote this a couple years ago. This relates to all institutions. This isn't aimed at you. System leadership with influence over separately accredited institutions. Those kinds of things are important. So if you get a problem at the top, that can influence a little bit of the individual institution. So other external influence are political appointees. In this case, at the state or federal level, interested in their home institution. So for example, in Arizona, if you have someone who is totally pushing Arizona State, you have to understand that you've got to deal with that because that could impact you in a good way or a bad way. I think, what is it, over half they're entering freshmen or transfers from you, so you want them to go in the right direction. But think about the times when you used to get football tickets for free, which you're not supposed to anymore. And think of the big schools, the Big 10, the Big 12, and all that kind of stuff, when trustees would get privileges from those schools back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, and that's gone away. That's a pure conflict of interest that can cause a problem. But that could influence, well, if we're picking between, we'll talk about what we talked about, OU and Oklahoma State. Well, I went to Oklahoma State and I got football tickets, therefore I'm going to push a little more money that way. I'm not saying that would happen, but those things over the years is a strong influence. And the problem, or the challenge for community colleges is, most of your legislators have graduated from a 4-year institution and they have to understand the importance of the community college. And as an alum, they have more loyalty. It's great to have someone on the board, and more than one of you have had experience with the institution itself. Grant-making organizations, there are some grants that aren't worth taking because they tell you how to do everything. And we in community colleges have experienced which ones to go to and which ones not to, because they're going to drive your agenda. Decisions at the federal level, all the disinvestment and environment and mistrust about the returns of higher ed, all these external influences matter. Now, internal, you can read these, okay? Split boards, tensions between the governing board and a foundation board. Do you have a foundation board?
We have tensions.
You have what?
We have tensions. We have tensions.
Well, and there's been all kinds of stuff written about how to handle that, but sometimes the foundation board is a bunch of wealthy people who can give and are used to power, and therefore they get more powerful than the decision-making body, okay? And if I happen to hit the nail on the head here, I didn't know that. So all I'm saying is, those clarity, this is where you all should bond and come together, because you want to make sure there's clarity between the two boards. You are the decision-making board. Boards reaching beyond governance into operations, and a lack of transparency between the institutional leadership and the board. So one of the things we talked about is really onboarding. How can you, when you come in as a trustee and throughout your ongoing development as a trustee, learn about what's going on the campuses, the right way to do that? Disputes about shared governance, that's not unusual and that can cause a problem. Faculty holding to commitments and ways of operation that no longer may be applicable. that happens. Frequently changing leadership, weaknesses in faculty credentials, financial statements, ratio scores. I don't know if you get a ratio score in the state of Arizona. All privates do, and a lot of the states have a ratio score that come from their state coordinating board.
What
So-
is that, what is that again?
Okay, a ratio score shows your financial health. So I'll give you the example in the state of Ohio, where I used to be at the state level. All private institutions have a ratio score that's based on a federal government formula. And if you fall below a certain level, you have to post a letter of credit, okay? Which is not fun, all right? And that's happening more and more to these institutions.
And private trade schools part of that?
No. And then when it comes to, in the state of Ohio, it's a different ratio score, and if you fall below it, it actually is in the state constitution that you could get, that the state has a right then to fire the entire board and the president. So ratio scores are important.
We don't have that.
Yeah, well, okay, put that on the plus side. So on the care, loyalty, and obedience, it's a matter of responsibility, it's a matter of obligations, and it's a matter of the idea of loyalty. Act in good faith and in a manner that is reasonably believed to be in the interest of the college or university and its nonprofit or public purposes rather than individual interest. We've talked about that a lot. Under the duty of obedience, you're obligated to make sure that the institution's in good financial health and solid and following the rules. And these things are self-explanatory, so I'm not going to take too long on that. So I didn't come up with this term when I wrote this article. The editors at Association and Governing Boards came up with the term, but I think it's useful. Basically, there are complexity of factors and influences. What do you need to know about accreditation to be successful? One thing you mentioned about coming to our conference, aside from learning about higher ed, you would be dipping yourself into, continuing ed credit for accreditation. Some suggestions on the accreditation process. Quality assurance just in time for a visit doesn't really work. And so integrating quality assurance into your overall work and having people across the campus understand our criteria. How many of you work at the campus are familiar with the HLC criteria? Okay, it should be everybody, you're pretty close, but it should be everybody so that that becomes part of your DNA, not, oh, we have to look at outcomes for teaching and learning, so let's add an assessment director right before the comprehensive visit. Or we'll fix our finances just in time. Aspiration doesn't work for accreditation, which is we intend to get here. It's evidence-based. Where are you at the time of the visit and the review? Budget accordingly, so that if you understand accreditation enough, you'll know you should be putting money into teaching and learning, obviously, and other kinds of things, and your own board training, etc. Who's your, do all the president, this is going to be this is something I did at ACCT when I was a plenary speaker. How many people in this room collectively know who the accreditation liaison officer is for your institution? How many people know when your next visit is? How many people know when your next specialized visits are? Okay, you guys all have to be able to raise your hand on that last question. You need to know you should keep a list, may I suggest, I did this as a president helped, I'm just suggesting, in your office that says regional accreditation, specialized accreditation, so nursing, engineering, anything that you have. Oh, now you get it, so what's the term? Okay, all right, it worked.
It was a weighted request.
But it is good to know that, and sometimes an institution has issues, and this really impacts programmatic and specialized accreditation if only one person knows what the criteria are. So I've been at schools where I've worked, where one person was assigned to deal with the education accreditation, and that one person really didn't get it or left. This should be integrated into the DNA, that's all. Just having people understand it and as a checkpoint reminder.
Barbara, quick question.
Yeah.
To a student who is nursing, let's say.
Yeah.
Or a certificate in welding, what's more important in terms of accreditation to that student? The welding accreditation, or body or nursing?
If there is some, because there's not a lot,
That's
yeah.
a bad one, but nursing
Yeah.
is one. Or HLC.
Well, everybody has to have HLC accreditation, you can't get federal financial aid. However, in nursing, you can't sit for the NCLEX and become a nurse if you don't have, if you're not at an accredited institution. So knowing the differences among these things is very important. If you're a journalism program and you're accredited, it's not going to get in the way of you being a journalist. It just means the institution has made the decision voluntarily to follow their criteria, which should be best practices in quality assurance.
The board typically doesn't get involved in those specialized accreditations.
The presidents will handle it for you. Now, I've known institutions that their reputation's been hurt if a specialized accreditation is in trouble. Nursing's a challenging one because you have to be a certain percentage pass rate of the national score. A few years ago, they lowered the score, or they made it higher rather. You know, there's been all kinds of things.
Well, we had it through Rio. One time we had a nursing program, and now we know it. All kinds of, it goes back to when I first got on, was that an accreditation issue? Yeah, that's what I thought.
And I've seen it at large institutions, so a large comprehensive research universities where it's a problem in one area. Now, one of the new things of the negotiated rulemaking is giving the folks who are accreditors the right to say if you're weak in one area, won't necessarily go down, but that's up to us to decide if we want to accept that, because it may not be written for existing accreditors. It may be written for those new competitors as accreditors that could come into the picture, okay? So you want someone who really gets it, and President, you need to know who your ALO is and that they're doing the right job. That's accreditation liaison officer. And be honest with us, I'll tell you, it's so much, it doesn't necessarily change the outcome, but if something happens, it's better to tell us than we find out on our own. And work closely, we have vice presidents who are very dedicated. You've seen them here before, at a large institution, or one where there may be an issue, or one where they're just interested in learning. We'll have our vice presidents come visit, speak to all the campuses about the criteria, come to the actual visit. But the visits, outcomes are the peer reviewers. It's not influenced by us. So I would say feel free to invite them. So if you have to, it reimburse us for that, but it's just travel. There's no other fees. So if you're a new president and your institution is coming up for their accreditation visit in 3 years, and you think it would help, you invite your liaison to come out and talk to like the whole campus, because we look at everything. Now, this is something you've already answered, but you need to have updates on this. So you just want to make sure that you get appropriate updates. And your strategic plan needs to be active, not just sitting on the shelf, and you need to have a strategic plan. And you would be surprised how many institutions get in trouble because they don't have a strategic plan. It's outdated or it's not really active. That helps you know you're following your mission, goals, objectives, visions, and all that.
So Barbara, in a multi-college district like Maricopa is with individually accredited colleges, are you looking for the strategic plan at the college, or are you also looking for a strategic plan at your district?
However you do it is what we look at.
We have a system-wide set of strategic directions, and the college plans align to that, and that is effective until 2020. We just started a new strategic planning process in anticipation of the one we have in place ending.
That's a perfect way to do it. Then everybody's involved appropriately.
So if you're our next, I won't say victim, but our next visit is
Were you
Gateway.
looking at Gateway?
Yeah. Where are, this will be their first time under the new accreditation as opposed to the old tenure thing. So where do we get involved in making sure they're ready for you.
And similarly, if you'd comment on the letter that you sent us that indicated
Yeah.
that,
You get your act together.
yeah, that
Because-
the board will be a special focus area.
It's
for
not
this.
normal for a president to write that paragraph. And I would like to have written it first, the first thing, but I was voted out of the island on that with staff. They wanted to get through all the other things. I think it's important that you show progress as a coordinated board. And any political or public issues that are not reflecting well on you, that you know and you want to work on anyway, that you do that. But I can't address, I'm gonna give you one of the answers, I can't say anything more about that visit because it's in the hand of people, not me. It eventually comes to me. I think the best thing you can do is all the things you've been saying today that you want to do, and just make sure you get there. And understand that you have, one of your duties of loyalty is to that campus, that college. Okay? I mean, makes sense, I think that's a good answer, because it's actually true. Let's just say, using your nearby neighbor, that stuff didn't help their accreditation. And they were accredited as a whole, one institution. All right, let me see if I missed anything. Well, you can read that.
Oh, I was just saying that we were talking about their
Oh,
word,
yeah.
word 10.
Then, you have to comply with the federal regulations. We all do. So, you have people on campus who know that, and will make sure you send in your Clary Act and all those kinds of things, that you report on the credit hour kinds of things and everything.
As it is at the moment.
It has to be real evidence, not aspirational, so,
Well,
yeah.
and things change.
The- Yes, but that's why you have a team report and a self-study that have months' difference, but after the team report comes back to you, you have time to respond to it and say, this is what's happened in that time. And if you were ever to get to point of a sanction, then you appear in front of the Institutional Actions Council, and there are definitely times that progress has been made where someone goes off a probation recommendation to a notice or just monitor. Or it can go in the other direction too. I'll tell you what not to say.
Now, when it comes to financial aid,
Yes.
especially, and who's held accountable for delinquencies, that's kind of.
That becomes your debt that the federal government is interested in making more bright lines about that.
So my
They have
question-
some.
My question is, does that have any HLC significance?
It's a red flag, and once you've had a red flag, you can open up other things to look at. So that second set I talked about the insurance system, which is like the honor system. If you look, if a red flag comes up on one of those, it can open up looking at all of them, okay? One of the things I would tell you when it comes to your visit is honesty is the best approach. And you don't get to control the meetings, that's up to the team who they want to meet with. Now, certainly the chancellor or the presidents in this case are going to do a good job of helping guide that team as to with whom they should meet. I always said when I was on the other side, it's the day there's filet mignon in the cafeteria, when the HLC team's on site. So I think this answers the question that you raised. Be active if you can, if you want to learn about accreditation, et cetera, to come to a conference. And then we ask our institutions, this goes both ways, if there are policies that aren't working for you at the federal level, then be our partners in advocating for those. So the bottom line is governance matters. Governance matters in accreditation. And I sent you, you have handouts on those kinds of things. These are a couple criteria where governance comes up for HLC, different at every accreditor. Operates with integrity in its financial, academic, personnel, and auxiliary functions, establishes and follows policies and processes, and ethical behavior on the part of its governing board, administration, faculty, and staff. So if any of you went off the railroad on this one and you were unethical or something like that, it could influence this kind of thing. The governing board, yes,
I have a question,
Yes.
going back to that one. So we're a body of 7, 2 are missing. How does that impact the perception of the board in moving forward in those commitments?
I was disappointed. But it's not going to have, I'm not here to have any influence on your visits. I'm here to help you. And what I was disappointed, because you've done so much good work today that you have to have the strength to tell the other folks we're not going through all the work again. This is the things we're doing, and it's important that we get there. And if you can get them to watch this, they may have had valid reasons, I'm not judging that, I'm just disappointed. And I think that's fair. So, this is an important one, that you're sufficiently autonomous, and this is a governance versus operations one, that, but what you do is in the best interest of the college. And like I said, with that new funky car I got that shows me if I'm in the lane or what the speed limit is, if you could have an invisible hologram saying students, 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 you know, that is important. So, these are more criteria, you can read them. I'm not gonna just read them to you, take a look at these two. I'll show you the next. So let's say, for example, that, let's take the ASU thing with Starbucks. This would never happen, so this is completely made up. But let's say you had the partnership with Starbucks, and the Starbucks people wanted you to completely change your curriculum, and you changed it. That wouldn't be so good. It'd be good to get all the students, but it wouldn't be so good. And the last one, number 4 is really important on this page.
Can you define oversee, where are you, 5 or 4?
4, I'll go back.
Governing board delegates data.
Can you define oversee?
And which one, 3 or 4?
4, not going to oversee academics.
The governing board delegates day-to-day management of the institution to the administration. Is that the one you're talking about? Oh, the next one.
No, and the.
Expects the faculty to oversee academic matters. Yeah, that's really easy for me to explain. The faculty control the curriculum. Now, they have deans and they have chairs and they have individuals and you have a provost, that's all very important. But they are over the curriculum. They, however, are not over if a program's failing and you say we need to do something about this. But their syllabi, their perspective, the way they teach it, they're the experts, they've been trained. You might think that they're going too far left or far right or whatever, but it's a faculty-owned curriculum.
And how does that oversee relate to shared governance?
Well, I'm going to show you one that's coming up in our criteria that is just passed and will be into effect next year. I haven't gotten to that one yet. I'll get to that in a minute. This is showing you need to be informed, as one of you said, get ready for the board meetings and make sure you know what's going on.
Backing up to the curriculum, where does industry, I'm talking CPE, I'm trying to say, where does industry's need come into the curriculum?
Well, that's the kind of leadership thing that hopefully with the faculty, you're doing appropriate advisory boards and you're reaching out, but through your own program review process. And let me tell you what program review is. Most institutions every 5 years will review a program. And they won't use just people in that department. It will either be people from other departments or even from another school. And they look at that, and if they come back and say, you need to upgrade your curriculum because it's 40 years old, that's up to the administration to make sure that happens.
And ACCT and nationally, we're having this discussion a lot.
I bet.
In terms of the turnover. If a new technology, which is typically what drives some of this, requires a new skill now as opposed to a year from now, how does that fit in?
You have to be responsive, so when I say it's up to the faculty, I don't mean to assume that they should be teaching IBM selectric typewriters. It's a matter of staying current and adjusting your curriculum, but the how-to falls in the hands of the faculty. The program reviews give you the opportunity to take a look. Do you do regular program reviews?
We do.
Okay, good answer. And how do you, let me ask one of the presidents, how do you use your program review on your campus? Help the trustees understand that. Pull your microphone towards you.
Well, we take clearly it's a systems approach, so we look at all parts of the program, so that's the staffing element, the budget element, the assessment element, the closing the loop part of it, feedback from the community, so it is a holistic look at evaluating the efficacy of the program from a systems point of view.
And what do you do if it suggests changes?
Clearly, if you don't make changes, same thing with learning outcomes assessment, is the purpose of the program review is to take what you've learned. There's always some change, it just depends on the drasticness or the scope of that change.
So we won't get in the weeds, we want to know your regular program reviews.
So, I'm stuck on this because.
Yeah, sure.
If, our process, is long, and a lot of different groups are involved in curriculum. I read this to say, that's faculty's job. Now, there's gotta be some standards, I get that, but faculty should be, if I read this right, faculty should have the right to change their curriculum as needed, without having to go through this.
No, faculty should not determine that one day they want to do revisionist history. That's not okay. That's not suggesting you're giving the faculty a pass. You're holding them accountable to do this the right way. So I taught speech, okay? It was called that in the day. And then I brought it out to teach mass communications. I don't get a right to say that all the things that changed along the way, and with new technologies, interactive video and all that, I don't get a right as a faculty member to say, I don't care about that. I'm going to teach it when it was one-way video. That's not what this is implying. This means ultimately hire the right faculty who have good qualifications. They know the content to make sure that it's a successful program. And in your reviews, you should find out if that's not the case.
I mean, software and the computer side changes, weekly.
And there are, I'll give you an example, a number of years ago, there was a community college near Buffalo, New York, and it was near a lake and named after the lake, and that community college had students sue them because they were teaching something that was outdated. Yeah. And so they couldn't get jobs because they weren't learning the right software language. So that's up to the presidents and everybody else. You can get involved in that kind of thing, but overall it's important that the faculty are the ones in front of the students, hopefully staying current in their discipline and therefore moving forward. Advisory boards from business and industry can be so helpful with this.
Carl Perkins required that.
Yeah, well, there you go. All right, so moving on, you've acknowledged what we talked about, that you have policies and internal procedures that are consistent. The administration, the faculty, staff, and students are involved in setting academic requirements. You see where it's both in that. Policy and processes for effective structures of contribution and collaboration. Okay, this is important. This is going to be a new criteria or component of a criteria in the next. Shared governance at the institution engages its internal constituencies, including its governing board, administration, faculty, staff, and students through planning, policies, and procedures. That means you get involved in shared governance, means you don't run everything and they don't run you. It's a collective process. It's using the best of what you learned in the IBM program, that you work together. I probably don't need to say anything more about that one. You've probably discussed it a lot. So the lessons learned, I just put a few ideas here. You've got them on the PowerPoint. I want to leave some time for feedback and interaction. But I think we've talked a lot about these. How can you do a win-win culture? What are the potential consequences of no change? And then I'd like you to continue to think, what will be your legacy? So I've covered a lot in a short period of time, longer than most of your board meetings though, now that I've learned that. And I would like any comments that you would like to make. Anything you've learned, any concerns you have. How did this work for you when you do something? Things like that.
You have on the agenda board best practices and examples of assessing board
Yes, I'm
performance.
sorry, you're right, in the interest of time, yes, you're right, I didn't look back at that. On board assessment, I think it's very important that you do a board assessment yearly. And you also at the, it's very easy to get forms to do that if you want to update them. ACCT and AGB have excellent examples. AGB has a whole publication on board assessment. I've also found it interesting that in my current position, our board reviews every board meeting. So there is an assessment, was it successful, did you get the materials in time, was it enough? Were the board interactions fair and reasonable, and you have an opportunity to comment on that. Now, because you're a public organization, anything you do will be discoverable and public, et cetera. So I do think it's important, though, for you to take a look at yourself as a board every year. And that will be something that we would notice if you weren't doing, we'd call to your attention.
Well, by statute, it's required in every school board.
So
Once you-
if your current process isn't exactly what you want it to be, or if you want any change, I would suggest bringing some examples from other institutions. One of the advantages of being in the league is we share. And when I was in the league, so I use that term, we share everything, salaries, benefits, policies, procedures, and people give that up willingly, and you can see other examples. Other comments?
Thank you for your.
You're more than welcome. Was this useful to you?
The last time I think HLC came in was a year prior to me coming on board. Dale Shumway, we've become close friends since then, but we met that day. And so I look back at that board, that was 5-member board, and now we got 7 totally different situations. I think I'm more comfortable with this board than back in those days.
Good.
Not saying that things could be worse, but they are better than they were.
That's a good thing, and I certainly didn't come here to criticize you. I came in to say, I want your reputation as the board to be as strong as your national reputation is as an institution. Linda?
Well, I was gonna say, I was reflecting back to where you started in terms of the reputation of Maricopa and the reputation of this board to 1990, when I was making the decision as to whether to leave the Los Angeles Community College District that had a notorious board.
The whole state is pretty famous for that.
Yeah, highly political stepping stone onto higher office. And one of many things that attracted me to apply for presidency in Maricopa was the reputation of the stability of the governing board, the cohesiveness of the board, and the support that the college district was enjoying from its community. So, I totally agree with you that it is imperative if we're going to attract the kind of leadership that we need for this college district to remain a premier community college district, that the board has to get to a better place so that the kind of talent that we want will want to come and work with us.
And you would never want one of your presidents to say, I'm just not comfortable with the way it's going, I'm gonna go somewhere else, because of that. They got really tough jobs, and there's one day a year they get paid off for that job, one day, and that's commencement. There are other wonderful lights along the way, but that day, if you could put that energy in a bottle and pull it out the other 364 days.
Statewide, we have 52 of us, and in a very loose organization, but I'm the rep on that. One of the things that we've talked about statewide is HLC, because of those 52, if you took a poll, half of them wouldn't know what HLC was. And they're new, I get that. We're having our first retreat ever this fall. And we're putting together the 3-day structure. It's hotter here in September. But I think having this among whatever numbers we get would be just as informational and supportive of 10 systems and 52.
Well, there are, aside from me, there are also wonderful presenters from my staff. It's kind of, in many cases, it's a capstone position. You have to have been around the block a few times, or you want to go on and be a president, so you come and learn that. So I did speak to the Minnesota board as a whole. And I was reluctant to go to the state of Minnesota because they had strong opinions about one of our policies. And that board made up for all of that. So there are several of us that, given some notice, can come and talk about, explain who we are.
She's now our HCCD president, so. And this is especially for new members, that even if they came from K-12 like I did, we knew what North Central was and so, but it's different in the post-secondary world.
I don't know K through 12, it's a different world. I know it from schools of ed, that's it.
So, thanks, and I think, that's something we should look at statewide as well.
Well, thank you all for your time. I know you're busy people, and we did some homework, and you were very open, and I want to thank you for that, what you said to each other and how you shared. I think that was very helpful and encouraging, I hope, to members in the audience. And it is a great institution. It really is.
We're honored to serve.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, you are more than welcome.
So now we're having that prime rib.
That,